The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves through Privet Drive as Petunia Dursley stood at her kitchen window, watching the perfectly manicured lawns of Little Whinging settle into evening shadows. Her reflection gazed back from the glass, thin and sharp-featured, but tonight something flickered behind her pale eyes that hadn't been there in years. A restlessness, a longing she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten its name. The house around her hummed with Vernon's contented snores from his armchair, the television murmuring about stock market fluctuations and weather patterns. Normal sounds, safe sounds, the kind of sounds that had filled her life for the past 5 years since she had married Vernon Dursley and embraced the beautiful, predictable mundanity of suburban existence. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the kind of evening when impossible things might happen. Petunia pressed her palm against the cool glass, remembering another autumn evening 15 years ago when she had sat in her childhood bedroom, quill trembling in her hand as she wrote the most important letter of her young life. The rejection had come swift and kind, Professor Dumbledore's gentle words explaining that Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry simply could not admit non-magical students, no matter how desperately they wished to attend. She had burned that letter in a fit of adolescent rage, but she had never burned the hunger it had awakened in her. While other girls her age had moved on to thoughts of boys and careers and normal futures, Petunia had haunted the local library, devouring every book on folklore, mythology, and historical accounts of unexplained phenomena she could find. She had taught herself Latin and ancient Greek, reasoning that if magical knowledge existed anywhere in the Muggle world, it would be hidden in the oldest texts. She had filled journal after journal with careful observations about her sister Lily's magic, documenting patterns and theories that no Hogwarts textbook would have contained. When Lily had come home for holidays, bubbling with stories of transfiguration and potions and defense against the dark arts, Petunia had listened with the intensity of a scholar, memorizing every detail, every spell name, every magical theory her sister casually mentioned. She had never let Lily know how desperately she absorbed every word, how she stayed awake long into the night, transcribing conversations and filling gaps in her understanding with educated guesses and careful research. By the time Lily graduated from Hogwarts, Petunia possessed a theoretical understanding of magic that would have impressed most first-year students, built entirely from second-hand knowledge, library research, and fierce determination. She had never been able to cast a spell, but she understood the principles behind charms, the mathematical precision required for transfiguration, the delicate balance of ingredients that made potions effective rather than explosive. And then she had met Vernon, solid and dependable, and magnificently, reassuringly normal. She had convinced herself that her magical obsession was merely a phase, a childhood fantasy she had outgrown. She had packed away her journals, donated her books to charity, and thrown herself into the business of becoming Mrs. Vernon Dursley with the same intensity she had once applied to magical theory. But the hunger never truly died. It simply went dormant, waiting. Now, staring out at the darkening street, Petunia felt that old familiar stirring in her chest. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. The doorbell rang. Petunia glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. Vernon grumbled and shifted in his chair but didn't wake. She smoothed her nightgown and padded to the front door, peering through the peephole at the empty street beyond. No one there. She opened the door, and her world tilted on its axis. A basket sat on her doorstep, woven from what looked like moonbeams and shadow, lined with blankets that shimmered with their own inner light, and nestled within those impossible blankets, a baby slept peacefully, his tiny fist curled against his cheek, a lightning bolt scar vivid against his forehead. Petunia knew that scar. She knew that face, so heartbreakingly similar to Lily's, but with James Potter's unruly black hair. She knew what this meant, before she saw the letter tucked beside the child, written in Dumbledore's familiar, spidery handwriting. Her hands shook as she lifted the letter, her eyes scanning the formal words that confirmed her worst fears and greatest hope. Lily was dead. James was dead. Their son, Harry, needed a home. Dumbledore's letter explained the circumstances with careful delicacy, speaking of love's protection and the safeguards that would keep Harry safe as long as he remained with his mother's blood relatives. It spoke of sacrifice and destiny, and the expectation that the boy would be raised in ignorance of his heritage until his Hogwarts letter arrived. Petunia read the letter twice, then crumpled it slowly in her fist. They expected her to hate this child. They expected her to raise him in ignorance and neglect, the way the Dursleys were supposed to behave according to their neat little predictions about Muggle families. They expected her to be the bitter, resentful woman who would ensure Harry Potter arrived at Hogwarts knowing nothing of his world, nothing of his power, nothing of his potential. They had no idea who Petunia Dursley really was. She knelt beside the basket, studying the sleeping child with growing wonder. Here was Lily's son, James's heir, the boy who had somehow survived the killing curse and destroyed the most feared dark wizard in generations. Here was a child who would grow up to inherit a magical legacy beyond imagining, and they wanted her to waste that potential. They wanted her to ensure he arrived at Hogwarts as ignorant and unprepared as possible, easy to control and manipulate by those who thought they knew what was best for him. The old hunger roared to life in her chest, but now it had purpose. Now it had direction. Petunia Evans Dursley had spent 15 years learning everything she could about magic. She had studied theory and history, memorized spell components and magical principles, absorbed knowledge with the desperate intensity of someone who knew she would never be able to use it herself. But she could teach it. She could pass it on. She could ensure that when Harry Potter finally claimed his birthright, he would be ready for anything the magical world could throw at him. She lifted the baby from his basket, marveling at how light he felt in her arms, how perfect and precious and absolutely miraculous. His green eyes fluttered open, so like lilies that Petunia's breath caught in her throat, and he gazed up at her with the solemn curiosity of someone far older than his apparent age. "Hello, little nephew," she whispered, and Harry's tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb with surprising strength. "You're home now. You're safe. And I'm going to teach you everything they never wanted you to know." Vernon appeared in the hallway, blinking sleep from his eyes and grumbling about the noise. He stopped short when he saw Petunia holding a baby, his face cycling through confusion, alarm, and mounting horror as she explained the situation. "Magic," he said flatly when she finished. "You're telling me this baby is one of those freaks, like your sister." Petunia felt something cold and dangerous settle in her stomach. She had forgotten, in her excitement, that Vernon's reaction to anything unusual was fear and rejection. She had forgotten that the man she married had fallen in love with the version of herself that had buried her magical interests, not the woman who had spent years dreaming of Hogwarts. "Yes," she said, quietly, holding Harry a little closer. "He's magical. Just like Lily was. Just like I always wanted to be." Vernon's face flushed the particular shade of purple that indicated an impending explosion. "We're not keeping it, Petunia. We're not raising one of those freaks in our house. I won't have our neighbors thinking we're associated with that sort of nonsense." "His name is Harry," Petunia said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "He's my nephew. He's family. And yes, Vernon, we're keeping him." The argument that followed would become legend in the Dursley household, though in later years they would both remember it differently. Vernon remembered Petunia as hysterical, emotional, clinging to sentiment and family obligation, despite his reasonable objections. Petunia remembered Vernon as small and frightened, so terrified of anything that challenged his narrow world-view that he would abandon a helpless child to protect his precious normalcy. The truth lay somewhere between their memories, but the outcome was never in doubt. When Petunia Dursley set her mind on something, she could be immovable as granite, and she had never wanted anything more than she wanted the chance to raise this child properly. By dawn, Vernon had capitulated. He would tolerate the boy's presence, he would provide for him financially, but he would have nothing to do with the magical nonsense. That would be entirely Petunia's responsibility. Petunia accepted those terms gladly. She had never intended to share this opportunity anyway. She spent Harry's first week at Privet Drive in a state of barely contained excitement, setting up a nursery in what had been her study, baby-proofing the house, and writing careful lists of everything she would need to begin his education properly. She ventured into London to visit the bookshops she had once frequented, purchasing texts on child development and early learning techniques, alongside new editions of the folklore and mythology books she had donated years ago. And late at night, when Vernon was asleep and Harry was settled in his crib, she retrieved the journals from the attic where she had hidden them, dusting off 15 years of accumulated magical knowledge and adding new observations about infant magic and developmental theory. Harry was an unusually alert baby, watching everything with those brilliant green eyes, reaching for objects with a coordination that seemed advanced for his age. More telling, small things happened around him that couldn't be explained by normal infant behavior. His bottle would be perfectly warm when Petunia retrieved it from the kitchen, even though she hadn't heated it. Toys would slide across his crib to within his reach. Once, when he was crying from a wet diaper, a clean one had appeared folded beside his changing table, though Petunia was certain she hadn't left it there. Accidental magic, she whispered to herself, making careful notes about timing and emotional triggers. Exactly what Lily used to do when she was upset or excited. Most parents would have been alarmed by such incidents. Most parents would have found ways to dismiss or ignore them, to pretend they were perfectly normal occurrences. Petunia was not most parents. She began speaking to Harry about magic from his earliest weeks, explaining the theory behind accidental magic, describing the emotional control that mature witches and wizards developed, telling him stories about his parents' magical abilities and the legacy he would one day inherit. She didn't expect him to understand the words yet, but she wanted him to grow up hearing magic discussed as something wonderful and natural, not frightening or shameful. When he turned 6 months old and began showing interest in picture books, she supplemented the usual children's stories with carefully chosen folklore and fairy tales, reading him accounts of wizards and magical creatures with the same matter-of-fact tone she used for stories about talking animals and brave knights. She wanted magic to be part of his normal understanding of the world from the very beginning. By his first birthday, Harry was walking and speaking in simple sentences, both earlier than most children his age. He was also displaying increasingly sophisticated accidental magic, summoning toys from across the room when he wanted them, and once, memorably, changing the color of his hair from black to bright red when Petunia mentioned how much he resembled his mother. Petunia celebrated these milestones with the joy of someone watching a miracle unfold. Every display of magic, every sign of advanced development, every indication of the extraordinary child Harry was becoming, filled her with pride and excitement for the future she was helping to shape. Vernon, meanwhile, had retreated into willful ignorance. He provided for Harry financially and treated him with distant politeness when forced to interact, but he refused to acknowledge anything unusual about the boy's development. When neighbors commented on how bright and well-behaved Harry seemed, Vernon would grunt non-committally and change the subject to safer topics like lawn care or automotive maintenance. Petunia didn't mind Vernon's emotional absence from Harry's upbringing. In some ways, it made things easier. She could focus entirely on nurturing Harry's magical development without having to argue about methodology or worry about Vernon's disapproval undermining her efforts. And Harry, for his part, seemed to accept the unusual family dynamic with the adaptability of a child who had never known anything different. He called Vernon Uncle Vernon and treated him with respectful distance. But with Petunia, he was affectionate and open, chattering about the pictures in his books, asking questions about everything he saw, displaying the boundless curiosity of a child who had been encouraged to explore and learn rather than told to be quiet and stay out of the way. As Harry's second birthday approached, Petunia began planning the next phase of his education. He was ready for more advanced concepts now, ready to begin understanding the theoretical foundations that would support his magical development. She had already taught him to read at a level far beyond his chronological age, and his magical control was becoming increasingly sophisticated. More importantly, she was ready to begin taking him into the magical world itself. The decision to venture into Diagon Alley required weeks of careful preparation. Petunia spent hours researching the current political climate in magical Britain, trying to understand what had changed since Voldemort's defeat and what challenges Harry might face as he grew older. She studied maps of magical London, memorized the locations of important shops and institutions, and practiced the explanations she would give if anyone questioned her presence in magical spaces. Most challenging of all, she had to prepare herself emotionally for the return to a world that had rejected her so many years ago. The night before their planned expedition, Petunia stood in Harry's nursery watching him sleep, her heart full of anticipation and terror in equal measure. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new phase in both their lives. Tomorrow, she would finally walk through Diagon Alley, not as an outsider looking in, but as the guardian of one of the most important children in the magical world. Tomorrow, her real work would begin. She smoothed Harry's dark hair away from his forehead, careful not to wake him, and whispered a promise that would shape both their destinies. "I'm going to make sure you're ready for anything, little one. I'm going to give you every advantage, every piece of knowledge, every tool you'll need to claim your birthright and protect the people you love. I'm going to raise you to be the wizard your parents would have wanted you to become, not the pawn others might try to make you." Harry stirred in his sleep, his tiny hand curling around her finger, and Petunia felt the weight of destiny settling around them both like a blessing and a challenge. The magical world had no idea what was coming, but they would learn soon enough that when Petunia Dursley set her mind on something, miracles became not only possible, but inevitable. Outside, the autumn wind continued to blow through Privet Drive, carrying away the last of the old leaves and making room for new growth. In the distance, London glittered with 1,000 lights, and somewhere among them, Diagon Alley waited with its ancient magic and infinite possibilities. Tomorrow would change everything. Tonight, it was enough to stand guard over a sleeping child and dream of the extraordinary future they would build together. One lesson at a time, one spell at a time, one miracle at a time. The letter from Dumbledore still lay crumpled in the kitchen wastebasket, its dire predictions and careful manipulations already obsolete. Petunia Dursley had chosen love over bitterness, knowledge over ignorance, potential over limitation. And that choice would reshape the entire wizarding world. The Halloween feast at Hogwarts had transformed the Great Hall into a spectacular display of magical artistry, with floating jack-o'-lanterns casting dancing shadows across the enchanted ceiling and tables laden with traditional autumn delicacies. Harry Potter sat among his Gryffindor housemates, enjoying the festive atmosphere while maintaining the alert awareness that had become second nature during his months at the school. His first 2 months at Hogwarts had established a routine of academic excellence, paired with generous collaboration, earning him respect from both faculty and students. Professor McGonagall regularly called upon him to demonstrate advanced techniques that helped other students understand complex concepts, while Professor Flitwick had begun incorporating Harry's innovative approaches to spell modification into his standard curriculum. Even Professor Snape, despite his continued personal hostility, had grudgingly acknowledged Harry's exceptional potions knowledge by assigning him increasingly challenging brewing projects that pushed the boundaries of first-year expectations. As the feast reached its climax, with the last of the pumpkin pasties being consumed and conversations growing more animated under the influence of magical atmosphere and abundant food, Professor Quirrell burst through the doors of the great hall with an expression of absolute terror. "Troll," he gasped, swaying dramatically as he reached the head table. "Troll in the dungeons. Thought you ought to know." With that announcement, he collapsed in what appeared to be a dead faint, though Harry's trained observation noted that the professor's breathing remained steady, and his positioning suggested conscious control rather than genuine unconsciousness. The great hall erupted into pandemonium as hundreds of students began shouting and scrambling in various directions. Harry remained seated, his mind immediately shifting into the analytical mode Petunia had taught him to employ during crisis situations. Something was wrong with this scenario. Professor Quirrell's dramatic entrance, his convenient fainting, and most importantly, the timing of a troll somehow entering Hogwarts during a major feast when all faculty and students were accounted for in a single location. Silence. Professor Dumbledore's voice boomed across the great hall, cutting through the chaos with magical amplification that commanded immediate attention. "Prefects, lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately. Teachers will follow me to the dungeons." Harry rose with the other Gryffindor students, but his mind was racing through the implications of the situation. Trolls were not intelligent enough to infiltrate Hogwarts's extensive magical defenses independently. Someone had to have let it in, and the timing suggested that the creature's presence was meant to serve as a distraction from something else. As they moved through the corridors toward Gryffindor Tower, Harry noticed that Hermione was not among their group. A quick mental review of the evening revealed that she had left the feast early, upset about something Ron had said during their afternoon classes. The realization hit him with cold certainty. Hermione was alone somewhere in the castle, unaware that a dangerous creature was prowling the corridors. "Ron," Harry said quietly, catching his friend's attention without alerting the prefects who were shepherding their group toward safety. "Where did Hermione go when she left dinner early?" Ron's face went pale as he understood the implication. "The girls' bathroom on the first floor," he whispered back. "She was crying about that thing I said in Charms class. She doesn't know about the troll." Harry felt the familiar surge of protective instinct that had guided many of his decisions since arriving at Hogwarts. His advanced magical training had prepared him for exactly this kind of crisis, and his ethical framework demanded that he act to protect someone in danger, regardless of the personal risk involved. "We have to find her," Harry said firmly, already calculating the most efficient route to the first-floor bathroom, while avoiding the areas where the troll was most likely to be encountered. "But the teacher said to go to our dormitories," Ron protested, though his tone suggested he was already prepared to follow Harry's lead, despite his concerns about breaking rules. "The teachers don't know that Hermione is missing," Harry replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had developed naturally during his months of helping other students navigate academic challenges. "We can't let her face a mountain troll alone while we sit safely in Gryffindor Tower." Harry's decision reflected the values that had shaped his entire approach to magical education. Knowledge and ability created responsibility, and personal safety could never take precedence over protecting others who were vulnerable. They slipped away from the group of Gryffindor students during a moment when the prefects were focused on managing a bottleneck at a staircase transition. Harry led Ron through corridors he had memorized during his extensive exploration of the castle, using his understanding of Hogwarts architectural patterns to avoid the most likely routes the faculty would take toward the dungeons. As they approached the first-floor bathroom, Harry's enhanced magical senses detected the distinctive aura of a large, hostile magical creature somewhere in the vicinity. The troll was not in the dungeons, as Professor Quirrell had claimed, but was instead prowling the very area where Hermione had sought refuge from social embarrassment. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with chilling clarity. Someone had deliberately released the troll and provided false information about its location, ensuring that the faculty would be searching in the wrong place while the creature endangered students in a different area entirely. Harry drew his holly wand, feeling the familiar warm response as the phoenix feather core resonated with his magical energy. His years of studying his parents' defensive techniques had prepared him for exactly this kind of confrontation, and his theoretical knowledge of troll behavior would guide his tactical approach. "Stay behind me," he instructed Ron, his voice calm despite the gravity of their situation. "Trolls have poor eyesight but excellent hearing, so we need to be strategic about creating distractions. My magical training has covered defensive techniques specifically designed for large hostile creatures." As they rounded the corner leading to the bathroom corridor, they heard Hermione's terrified screaming echoing from within the stone-walled chamber. The sound galvanized both boys into immediate action, but Harry's response was guided by tactical analysis rather than blind courage. The troll was indeed massive, standing nearly 12 feet tall with arms like tree trunks and a club that could crush stone with casual swings. It had cornered Hermione near the sinks, and only her quick thinking in barricading herself behind the sturdiest fixtures had prevented immediate catastrophe. Harry's mind immediately categorized the creature's strengths and weaknesses based on his extensive reading about magical creatures and combat tactics. Trolls possessed tremendous physical power, but limited intelligence, making them vulnerable to misdirection and coordinated attacks that exploited their inability to process multiple threats simultaneously. "Ron, when I give the signal, create as much noise as possible to draw its attention," Harry whispered, his tactical planning proceeding with the same methodical precision he applied to academic challenges. "I'm going to attempt a binding spell that should immobilize it long enough for us to get Hermione to safety." The spell Harry intended to use was not found in any first-year textbook. It was an advanced restraint charm he had learned from his father's aura training materials, modified according to principles from his mother's research on magical creature management. The combination required precise wand work and significant magical power, but it offered their best chance of neutralizing the threat without causing permanent harm to the troll. "Now," Harry said firmly, and Ron immediately began shouting and throwing debris to attract the creature's attention. As the troll turned its massive head toward the new disturbance, Harry stepped into optimal casting position and began the complex spell sequence with movements that flowed like choreographed dance. "Immobilis Maxima," he incanted, pouring his magical energy into the binding charm while visualizing silver threads wrapping around the troll's limbs and torso. The spell struck the troll with visible force, streams of silvery light emanating from Harry's wand to encase the creature in magical restraints that glowed with the distinctive warmth of protection magic rather than harmful hexes. The troll struggled against the magical bonds for several moments before the binding charm's power overcame its physical strength, leaving it immobilized but unharmed in the center of the destroyed bathroom. Hermione emerged from her hiding place with tears of relief and amazement streaming down her face. "Harry, how did you know that spell?" "That was incredibly advanced magic. Most adult wizards couldn't have cast a restraint charm powerful enough to stop a mountain troll. I've been studying my parents' research on defensive magic," Harry explained, helping her navigate around the debris while keeping his wand trained on the bound troll. They developed techniques specifically for neutralizing dangerous creatures without causing unnecessary harm. Before Hermione could respond, the sound of running footsteps announced the arrival of Professor McGonagall, Professor Snape, and Professor Quirrell, who had apparently realized that the troll was not where it was supposed to be. Professor McGonagall took in the scene with barely concealed amazement. The immobilized troll bound in advanced magical restraints, 3 first-year students who were shaken but unharmed, and a bathroom that showed signs of significant magical combat. "Mr. Potter," Professor McGonagall said, her voice carrying a mixture of concern and professional curiosity, "would you care to explain how 3 first-year students came to be confronting a mountain troll, and more importantly, how you managed to subdue it with what appears to be graduate-level defensive magic?" Harry's explanation was characteristically thorough and honest, describing his realization that Hermione was missing, his decision to attempt a rescue rather than wait for adult intervention, and his application of advanced defensive techniques learned from his parents' research materials. Professor Snape examined the magical restraints with the critical eye of someone who understood the theoretical complexity involved in their creation. This binding charm demonstrates mastery of principles that are typically taught to seventh-year students preparing for aura careers, he observed, his tone grudgingly respectful despite his personal antipathy toward Harry. More significantly, Professor Quirrell seemed distinctly uncomfortable with the outcome of the evening's events, his nervous stammering more pronounced than usual as he attempted to minimize the significance of what had occurred. As the professors worked to remove the troll from the castle and repair the damage to the bathroom, Harry found himself reflecting on the broader implications of the incident. The creature's presence had not been accidental, and its location had been deliberately misrepresented to ensure that faculty response would be misdirected. Someone at Hogwarts had orchestrated this crisis, either to test Harry's abilities or to create an opportunity for some other plan that required faculty attention to be focused elsewhere. The realization that he was facing not just academic challenges, but potential threats from within the Hogwarts community added a new dimension to Harry's educational experience. His advanced preparation would need to encompass not just classroom excellence, but also the practical application of defensive magic in real-world crisis situations. Later that evening, as they sat in the Gryffindor common room, processing the extraordinary events of Halloween night, Harry's friends expressed amazement at both his magical abilities and his decision-making under pressure. "You saved my life," Hermione said with quiet intensity, her usual academic enthusiasm replaced by profound gratitude and respect. "But more than that, you showed incredible judgment in recognizing that something was wrong with the whole situation." Ron nodded enthusiastically. "The way you figured out that the troll wasn't really in the dungeons and then managed to track down where Hermione actually was, that was brilliant detective work." Harry's response reflected the values that had guided him throughout the crisis. "I couldn't have done it alone." Ron's distraction was crucial to the success of the binding spell, and Hermione's quick thinking in finding defensible cover bought us the time we needed to implement a strategy. The Halloween incident had demonstrated that Harry's exceptional magical education extended beyond academic subjects to include practical crisis management and protective magic that could save lives when properly applied. More importantly, it had revealed the depth of loyalty and courage that characterized his friendships with Ron and Hermione. All three had shown willingness to risk personal safety to protect each other, establishing bonds that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. As news of the troll incident spread throughout Hogwarts, Harry found that his reputation evolved beyond academic excellence to include recognition as someone who could be counted on during genuine emergencies. Younger students began approaching him for advice, not just about coursework, but about how to respond to various challenges they encountered. The faculty response was equally significant. Professor McGonagall arranged for Harry to receive additional training in advanced defensive magic, recognizing that his natural abilities and theoretical knowledge should be supplemented with formal instruction in practical applications. Professor Flitwick expressed interest in working with Harry on the theoretical foundations behind the spell modifications he had developed, seeing potential for collaborative research that could benefit the broader magical community. Even Professor Dumbledore took notice of the incident, scheduling a private meeting with Harry to discuss the implications of his advanced defensive abilities and the responsibilities that came with such exceptional preparation. The Halloween crisis had transformed Harry's Hogwarts experience from purely academic achievement to recognition as a young leader whose knowledge and character made him someone others could depend on during times of genuine danger. As he prepared for bed that night, Harry reflected on how the evening's events had validated the educational philosophy Petunia had instilled in him throughout his childhood. Advanced magical knowledge was indeed a tool for protecting others, and the ethical framework she had taught him had guided his decisions during a crisis that could have had tragic consequences. The troll incident had also confirmed his growing suspicion that his time at Hogwarts would involve challenges beyond normal academic coursework. Someone had orchestrated the evening's events, and their motives remained unclear. But Harry felt confident that his preparation, both intellectual and moral, would guide him successfully through whatever trials lay ahead. His friendships with Ron and Hermione had been strengthened by shared danger. His magical abilities had proven effective in real-world applications, and his commitment to protecting others had been validated by successful intervention in a life-threatening situation. Tomorrow would bring new classes, new opportunities to share knowledge with fellow students, and continued development of the advanced magical techniques that set him apart from other young wizards. But tonight, it was enough to know that when crisis had demanded immediate action, he had responded with courage, wisdom, and effectiveness that honored both his parents' legacy and Petunia's careful preparation. The Halloween troll had been neutralized, Hermione was safe, and Harry Potter had demonstrated that exceptional magical education, when guided by ethical principles and genuine concern for others, could indeed make the difference between tragedy and triumph. The weeks following the Halloween troll incident had brought an unexpected shift in the atmosphere at Hogwarts. Harry Potter found himself at the center of increasingly complex mysteries that seemed to swirl around the school like autumn mists, each revelation adding new layers to puzzles that his advanced magical education was uniquely suited to unravel. It began with seemingly innocuous observations during his daily routines. Professor Quirrell's nervous behavior had intensified beyond his usual stammering uncertainty, particularly when he encountered Harry in corridors or during Defense Against the Dark Arts classes. More telling was the way certain magical signatures seemed to cluster around areas where Quirrell had been, residual traces of dark magic that Harry's enhanced sensitivity allowed him to detect long after others would have noticed anything unusual. The breakthrough came during a late evening study session in the library, where Harry was researching advanced protective enchantments for an independent project Professor McGonagall had assigned him. Hermione sat across from him, working through complex arithmancy calculations, while Ron attempted to complete a particularly challenging transfiguration essay that had been giving him trouble for days. "Harry," Hermione said suddenly, looking up from her mathematical notations with the expression of someone who had just connected important pieces of information. "Do you remember Professor McGonagall mentioning something about additional security measures being implemented this year?" Harry's memory immediately supplied the relevant details from their first Transfiguration class. She said there were certain objects housed at Hogwarts that required special protection, and that students should avoid the third-floor corridor unless they wanted to encounter something genuinely dangerous. "Exactly," Hermione continued, her voice dropping to ensure their conversation remained private, despite the library's late evening emptiness. "And do you remember Professor Dumbledore's warning during the welcome feast about that specific corridor being off-limits to anyone who didn't wish to die a most painful death?" Ron looked up from his essay with growing interest. "You two are onto something, aren't you? That's your detective faces, the same ones you had when you figured out the troll wasn't really in the dungeons." Harry's mind was already working through the implications of what Hermione was suggesting. The timing of increased security measures, the specific nature of Professor Dumbledore's warning, and the unusual behavior patterns he had observed in various faculty members all pointed toward the presence of something extraordinarily valuable and dangerous hidden within the school. "There's something else," Harry said thoughtfully, his voice carrying the analytical tone that had become familiar to his friends during their months of collaborative problem-solving. "I've been detecting traces of dark magic around the school, particularly in areas where Professor Quirrell has been spending time." Hermione's eyes widened with concern and fascination. "You can detect dark magic residue? That's an incredibly advanced ability. Most auras require specialized training and magical instruments to sense such traces." "It's something I developed while studying my parents' research," Harry explained. They documented techniques for recognizing the distinctive magical signatures left by various forms of dark magic, and I've been practicing the detection methods during my independent studies. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Madame Pince, the stern librarian who patrolled the stacks with the dedication of someone personally invested in protecting every book from student misuse. Her appearance signaled that the library would soon close for the evening, but Harry's mind was already racing through the research possibilities that lay ahead. Over the following days, Harry applied the investigative methods Petunia had taught him during their studies of magical history and theory. He began systematic observation of faculty behavior patterns, careful analysis of the magical residues he detected throughout the castle, and methodical research into objects that might require the kind of extraordinary protection Professor Dumbledore had referenced. The answer came to him during a particularly productive session in the library's restricted section, where his special privileges allowed him access to texts that contained detailed information about legendary magical artifacts and their historical significance. Nicholas Flamel, Harry whispered to himself, as he found the crucial entry in a volume dedicated to famous alchemists and their achievements. The only known creator of the Philosopher's Stone, the legendary substance that grants immortality and transforms base metals into gold. The pieces fell into place with startling clarity. The Philosopher's Stone would indeed require extraordinary protection, its value to dark wizards being incalculable. More importantly, the stone's presence at Hogwarts would explain why someone might orchestrate elaborate distractions like the Halloween troll incident to create opportunities for infiltration attempts. Harry's research revealed that Nicholas Flamel was over 600 years old, sustained by the elixir of life produced by his Philosopher's Stone. The alchemist was also known to be a close friend and collaborator of Professor Dumbledore, which would explain why the stone might be entrusted to Hogwarts' protection during a period of increased dark magic activity. Most significantly, Harry's advanced understanding of magical theory allowed him to recognize that the stone's power would make it an irresistible target for anyone seeking to restore themselves after a devastating defeat. Someone like Voldemort, whose spirit form would require extraordinary magical assistance to achieve physical resurrection. When Harry shared his discoveries with Ron and Hermione that evening in the Gryffindor common room, their reactions confirmed the gravity of the situation they had uncovered. "The Philosopher's Stone," Hermione breathed, her voice filled with awe at the historical significance of the artifact. "If it's really here at Hogwarts, then whoever is trying to steal it must be incredibly powerful and desperate." Ron's face had gone pale as he grasped the implications. "You think you know who is trying to get it? But he's dead, isn't he? You defeated him when you were a baby." Harry's expression grew troubled as he shared the conclusions his research had led him to reach. Voldemort's body was destroyed, but that doesn't necessarily mean his spirit was eliminated entirely. Someone with his level of dark magic knowledge might find ways to survive in weakened form, waiting for an opportunity to restore himself to full power. The conversation turned to the practical implications of their discovery. If the Philosopher's Stone was indeed hidden at Hogwarts, and if someone was making systematic attempts to steal it, then the school community was facing a threat that went far beyond academic challenges or normal teenage concerns. More troubling was Harry's growing certainty that the threat was coming from within Hogwarts itself. The Halloween troll incident had demonstrated that someone with access to the castle was actively working to create opportunities for infiltration and theft. "We need more information about the security measures protecting the stone," Harry said, with the methodical approach that had characterized all his academic work. "If we can understand how it's being protected, we might be able to determine who has the knowledge and access necessary to circumvent those protections." The research that followed drew upon every aspect of Harry's exceptional magical education. His knowledge of ancient, protective enchantments, gained from his parents' research materials, helped him identify the types of magical defenses that would be appropriate for safeguarding such a valuable artifact. His understanding of magical creature behavior, developed through extensive reading about defense against the dark arts, allowed him to recognize that certain creatures mentioned in recent faculty conversations would serve as ideal guardians for hidden treasures. Most importantly, his systematic approach to problem-solving, instilled by years of collaborative learning with Petunia, enabled him to organize their investigation in ways that maximized their chances of uncovering crucial information while minimizing the risks associated with their amateur detective work. The breakthrough came when Harry overheard a conversation between Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape discussing the need to check on Fluffy, a name that meant nothing to most students, but which Harry recognized from his extensive reading about magical creature guardianship. Fluffy is a three-headed dog, Harry explained to his friends during their next planning session. They're used as guardians for valuable objects because their multiple heads make them nearly impossible to approach undetected, and their loyalty to their handlers is absolute once properly established. "So the stone is guarded by a three-headed dog," Hermione said, her tone mixing excitement with concern. That would certainly explain why Professor Dumbledore warned students away from the third-floor corridor in such dramatic terms. But it also means that whoever is trying to steal the stone has found ways to get past Fluffy, Ron observed. That's not something just any wizard could accomplish. Harry's analysis of the situation had led him to several disturbing conclusions. The person attempting to steal the stone possessed advanced knowledge of magical creatures, had access to information about Hogwarts' internal security arrangements, and was skilled enough in dark magic to leave detectable residues throughout areas where they had been conducting reconnaissance. More ominously, the timing of various incidents throughout the school year suggested that the theft attempt was not a single dramatic heist, but rather a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to gradually overcome each layer of protection through systematic analysis and preparation. The Halloween Troll had been a test of faculty response times and coordination. Various other minor disruptions throughout the term had served to map out security procedures and identify potential vulnerabilities in the castle's defenses. Whoever was orchestrating this campaign possessed both the patience and the expertise to conduct a thorough analysis before attempting the actual theft, characteristics that suggested someone with extensive experience in both dark magic and strategic planning. As Harry shared these conclusions with his friends, he felt the weight of responsibility settling around him, like the familiar sensation of donning protective magical equipment. His advanced education had prepared him to recognize threats that others might miss, but it had also created an obligation to act on that knowledge in ways that served the greater good. "We can't just sit back and hope the adult wizards handle this properly," Harry said, with quiet conviction. "My research suggests that the threat is coming from someone within Hogwarts who understands our security measures intimately. If the faculty don't realize that the danger is internal rather than external, their defensive strategies might be completely inadequate." Hermione nodded with the same determination that had driven her academic excellence throughout their first year. "You're right. We need to take action to protect the stone, even if it means going beyond what's expected of first-year students." Ron's expression showed both nervousness and resolve as he committed to supporting his friends, despite the obvious dangers involved. "We're in this together, whatever happens. You two have taught me that sometimes doing what's right is more important than following rules or avoiding risks." As they began planning their approach to investigating and potentially protecting the Philosopher's Stone, Harry reflected on how far they had all come since their first meeting on the Hogwarts Express. Ron had developed from someone who relied primarily on magical cultural knowledge into a strategic thinker who could contribute meaningfully to complex problem-solving efforts. Hermione had evolved from a brilliant but somewhat isolated academic achiever into a collaborative researcher who could integrate theoretical knowledge with practical applications under pressure. Most significantly, Harry himself had grown from someone who possessed exceptional preparation but lacked real-world experience into a leader who could synthesize various forms of knowledge into actionable plans that served the broader magical community. Their investigation of the Philosopher's Stone represented the culmination of their first year's worth of academic and personal development. They would need to apply everything they had learned about magical theory, creature behavior, protective enchantments, and collaborative problem-solving to address a threat that could have implications far beyond their individual safety or academic success. As they prepared for what might be their most challenging undertaking at Hogwarts, Harry felt profound gratitude for the educational foundation Petunia had provided throughout his childhood. Her emphasis on ethical decision-making, systematic analysis, and collaborative learning had prepared him not just to excel in classroom settings, but to take meaningful action when the magical community faced genuine threats. The Philosopher's Stone crisis would test every aspect of their preparation, but Harry was confident that their combined abilities, guided by the values that had shaped their friendship, would prove equal to whatever challenges lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to gather information about the stone's protection, new chances to analyze the behavior patterns of suspected threats, and continued development of the strategic plans that would guide their intervention. But tonight, it was enough to know that they had successfully identified a crucial threat to the magical community and were prepared to take action that honored both their academic achievements and their moral obligations to protect others from harm. The mystery of the Philosopher's Stone had been solved through careful research and systematic analysis. Now came the greater challenge of ensuring that such a powerful artifact remained in the hands of those who would use it wisely, rather than allowing it to fall to those who would abuse its extraordinary power for selfish or destructive purposes. The night air in the third-floor corridor carried an electric tension that made Harry Potter's enhanced magical senses tingle with anticipation and warning. Behind the locked door that Professor Dumbledore had declared off-limits, he could hear the rhythmic breathing of something massive and dangerous, punctuated by occasional low growls that suggested Fluffy was not entirely asleep, despite the haunting melody drifting from a magical harp in the corner. Harry crouched beside his friends in the shadows, his mind racing through the strategic analysis that had brought them to this crucial moment. Every piece of research, every careful observation, every theoretical framework he had mastered during his years of preparation with Petunia had led to this confrontation with forces that threatened not just Hogwarts, but the entire magical world. The magical protections Professor Quirrell had bypassed to reach this point were impressive in their sophistication, each representing a different approach to magical security that reflected the expertise of various Hogwarts faculty members. Harry had identified and analyzed each challenge during their careful descent through the layers of defense, his advanced knowledge allowing him to understand not just how the protections worked, but why they had ultimately proven insufficient against someone with Quirrell's level of dark magic expertise. Professor Sprout's Devil's Snare had been neutralized through precise application of the Lumos Solem charm, a technique Harry recognized from his extensive reading about magical botany and plant-based defenses. The flying keys had required strategic thinking about aerodynamics and magical pursuit patterns, challenges that his theoretical understanding of enchanted object behavior had helped him navigate successfully. Professor McGonagall's giant chess set had tested their ability to think strategically under pressure, with Ron's natural tactical instincts proving crucial to their successful passage, despite Harry's superior theoretical knowledge of magical game theory. But it was Professor Snape's logic puzzle, involving potions and protective flames, that had truly demonstrated the value of Harry's exceptional preparation. The riddle required not just logical reasoning, but deep understanding of potion properties, magical combustion principles, and the theoretical frameworks that governed protective enchantments. While Hermione had approached the puzzle with her characteristic, methodical analysis, Harry's solution had drawn upon years of studying his mother's potions research and his father's work on magical protection systems. He had recognized the underlying principles immediately, understanding that the puzzle was designed not just to test intellectual ability, but to ensure that anyone attempting to proceed possessed genuine expertise in magical theory rather than mere cunning or determination. Now, as they prepared for the final confrontation, Harry felt the weight of destiny settling around him, with the familiar sensation of protective magic activating in response to immediate danger. His holy wand responded to his touch with unusual warmth, the phoenix feather core resonating with magical energies that seemed to anticipate the challenges ahead. The chamber beyond the trapdoor was larger than Harry had expected, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. At the center of the room, Professor Quirrell stood before the mirror of Erised, his usually nervous demeanor replaced by focused intensity as he attempted to extract the Philosopher's Stone from its magical hiding place. But Quirrell was not alone. The air around him shimmered with the presence of something that made Harry's scar burn with the familiar pain that had plagued him throughout the school year. A sensation he now understood represented the proximity of the one who had tried to kill him as an infant. "Voldemort," Harry said quietly, the name carrying none of the fear that paralyzed most wizards, but rather the calm recognition of someone who had spent years preparing for exactly this confrontation. Quirrell spun around, his face transformed by the malevolent presence that had been using him as a host throughout the school year. Where his nervous stammering had once hidden his true nature, now his voice carried the cold authority of someone accustomed to absolute power and casual cruelty. "Harry Potter," Quirrell said, his tone mixing surprise with calculating interest. "How convenient that you should arrive just as I complete my master's return to power. Lord Voldemort has been most eager to meet the child who somehow survived the killing curse." The turban that had concealed Quirrell's secret throughout the year fell away, revealing a face on the back of his head that Harry recognized from his worst nightmares, the features of Tom Riddle twisted by years of dark magic into something barely human. Harry felt no surprise at the revelation, his months of careful observation and analysis having prepared him for exactly this moment. His enhanced magical senses had detected the dual magical signatures emanating from Quirrell throughout the year, and his theoretical understanding of possession magic had suggested possible explanations for the professor's erratic behavior. More importantly, his extensive study of his parents' research had given him insights into the specific type of protection magic that had saved his life as an infant, knowledge that would prove crucial in the confrontation that was now inevitable. "You seem remarkably composed for someone facing the greatest dark wizard in history," Voldemort observed, his voice carrying the peculiar dual resonance that resulted from speaking through a possessed host. Most children would be paralyzed with terror at this moment. Harry's response reflected the confidence that came from years of exceptional preparation combined with unwavering moral conviction. "I've spent my entire life learning about magic, including the theoretical foundations of the protection that saved me from you once before. I understand what you are and why you're here, and I'm prepared to stop you from obtaining the stone." The ensuing battle would have been impossible for any ordinary 11-year-old wizard to survive, but Harry Potter was far from ordinary in his magical education or his natural abilities. When Voldemort commanded Quirrell to kill him, Harry responded with defensive techniques that drew upon every aspect of his advanced training. The protean shield he erected was not found in any first-year textbook, but rather represented a synthesis of protection, magic principles he had learned from his mother's research, modified according to combat techniques documented in his father's aura training materials. The shield not only deflected Quirrell's curses, but actually transformed the dark magic into harmless light, demonstrating the advanced theoretical understanding that Petunia had spent years helping him develop. When Quirrell attempted to physically restrain him, Harry discovered that his touch burned the possessed professor with the same protective magic that had saved him as an infant. But rather than using this advantage to cause unnecessary harm, Harry applied the contact strategically, focusing on disrupting the possession magic that bound Voldemort to his host, rather than simply inflicting pain. The technique he employed was based on his understanding of how love-powered protection magic could be channeled consciously rather than merely activated by circumstance. Years of studying the theoretical foundations of his mother's sacrifice had taught him that the protection she had given him could be directed intentionally when he chose to act in defense of others, rather than merely in self-preservation. As Quirrell writhed in agony from the contact with Harry's protected skin, the Philosopher's Stone fell from his robes, rolling across the chamber floor toward the mirror of Erised, where it had been magically concealed. Harry made no move to claim the stone for himself, understanding that its power was too dangerous to be possessed by anyone who might be tempted to use it for personal gain. Instead, he focused on maintaining the magical contact that was forcing Voldemort's spirit to separate from his host, a process that required tremendous concentration and precise control of the protection magic flowing through him. The separation, when it finally occurred, was violent and dramatic. Voldemort's spirit form materialized briefly in the chamber, a writhing mass of shadow and malevolence that shrieked with frustrated rage before dissipating into nothingness, unable to maintain coherence without a physical host to anchor its existence. Quirrell collapsed unconscious but alive, the removal of Voldemort's presence leaving him severely weakened but no longer possessed by the dark spirit that had controlled his actions throughout the year. Harry stood over the fallen professor, his wand still drawn, but his expression showing concern rather than triumph. His exceptional magical education had prepared him not just to defeat dark wizards, but to understand the complexities of magical possession and the importance of distinguishing between victims and perpetrators. When Professor Dumbledore arrived moments later, summoned by magical alarms that had detected the massive discharge of protective magic in the chamber, he found Harry kneeling beside Quirrell's unconscious form, checking for signs of serious injury rather than celebrating his victory over one of the most dangerous dark wizards in magical history. "Harry," Dumbledore said, his voice carrying amazement and profound respect as he took in the scene before him. "You have accomplished something that most adult wizards would consider impossible. How did you know to use contact-based protection magic to force a separation between Voldemort and his host?" Harry's explanation revealed the depth of understanding that had guided his actions throughout the confrontation. "I studied my parents' research extensively, particularly their work on the theoretical foundations of sacrificial protection magic. I realized that the protection my mother gave me could be channeled actively when I chose to act in defense of others, rather than simply reacting to personal threats." Dumbledore's expression showed both admiration and something approaching awe as he grasped the implications of what Harry had achieved. "You consciously directed love-powered protection magic with the precision of someone who understood its theoretical mechanisms completely. That represents a level of magical sophistication that few wizards ever develop, regardless of their age or experience." The aftermath of the confrontation brought recognition that Harry's exceptional preparation had not only enabled him to protect the Philosopher's Stone, but had also provided him with insights into advanced magical theory that could benefit the entire wizarding community. His technique for channeling protection magic consciously, rather than relying on automatic activation, represented a breakthrough in defensive magic that Professor Dumbledore immediately recognized as having significant implications for future conflicts with dark forces. More importantly, Harry's approach to the confrontation had demonstrated that exceptional magical ability, when guided by ethical principles and genuine concern for others, could achieve outcomes that pure power or technical skill alone could never accomplish. As they prepared to leave the chamber, with the Philosopher's Stone safely returned to its proper protections and Professor Quirrell receiving the medical attention he needed, Harry reflected on how the year's events had validated every aspect of the educational philosophy that had shaped his development. Petunia's emphasis on understanding the theoretical foundations of magic had enabled him to recognize threats that others missed and develop solutions that drew upon multiple branches of magical knowledge. Her insistence on ethical decision-making had guided his choices throughout the crisis, ensuring that he used his abilities to protect others rather than to gain power or recognition for himself. Most significantly, her dedication to fostering collaborative relationships had provided him with friends whose different strengths and perspectives had been crucial to their successful navigation of the challenges protecting the stone. The final confrontation with Voldemort had demonstrated that Harry Potter was indeed extraordinarily prepared for the magical challenges he would face throughout his life. But it had also shown that his greatest strength lay not in his individual abilities, but in his commitment to using those abilities in service of others. As they emerged from the depths of Hogwarts into the dawn light of a new day, Harry felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this moment. Years of careful preparation, guided by love and wisdom, had culminated in a victory that protected not just the Philosopher's Stone, but the future safety of the entire magical community. The confrontation had ended with Voldemort's defeat, but Harry understood that this was likely only the first of many challenges he would face. His exceptional magical education had prepared him not just to survive such encounters, but to emerge from them with greater understanding of his responsibilities and stronger commitment to the values that would guide his continued development. When he finally returned to the Gryffindor dormitory and wrote his first letter home to Petunia, Harry's words carried the quiet satisfaction of someone who had successfully applied years of learning to achieve something truly meaningful. The wizarding world was safer because of the education she had provided him, the values she had instilled in him, and the love that had shaped every aspect of his preparation for the magical life he was destined to lead. Tomorrow would bring the end of term feast, final examinations, and the journey back to Privet Drive for the summer holidays. But tonight, it was enough to know that when the magical community had needed protection from one of its greatest threats, Harry Potter had been ready with the knowledge, wisdom, and courage necessary to ensure that love and justice prevailed over darkness and selfish ambition. The first year at Hogwarts had ended exactly as Petunia had hoped it would, with Harry using his extraordinary preparation not to dominate others, but to serve the greater good with humility, effectiveness, and unwavering commitment to the principles that would guide him throughout his magical life. The morning of Harry's 5th birthday dawned crisp and clear, autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of Privet Drive and casting dancing patterns across the kitchen table where Petunia had laid out an extraordinary collection of books. Not the usual picture books and simple readers one might expect for a child's birthday, but leather-bound volumes with titles embossed in gold, Elementary Principles of Magical Theory, A History of Magic in Britain, and Magical Creatures and Where to Find Them. Harry bounced in his chair, green eyes bright with excitement as he reached for the topmost book. His small fingers traced the gilt lettering with reverence, already recognizing some of the words from their daily reading sessions. "This one's about magical creatures, isn't it, Aunt Petunia?" he asked, his pronunciation careful and precise. "The one you promised we'd read when I got big enough to understand the harder words?" Petunia smiled, her heart swelling with pride at his eagerness to learn. "That's exactly right, darling. And now that you're 5, I think you're ready for much more advanced lessons." Over the past 3 years, Harry's development had exceeded even Petunia's most optimistic expectations. His reading ability rivaled that of children twice his age, and his comprehension of complex magical concepts was nothing short of remarkable. More importantly, his accidental magic had evolved from random emotional outbursts into something approaching conscious control. Just last week, when he had dropped his favorite toy car behind the heavy bookshelf, Harry had simply held out his hand and concentrated until the car slid out from its hiding place and into his palm. When Petunia had praised him for such controlled magic, he had explained with 5-year-old solemnity that he had imagined an invisible rope connecting his hand to the toy, just like she had taught him about magical intention and focus. The theoretical framework Petunia had been building in his mind was beginning to manifest in practical application, exactly as she had hoped. After breakfast, they settled into what had once been Vernon's study, but had gradually transformed into Harry's classroom. The walls were lined with maps of magical Britain, charts showing the phases of the moon and their relationship to potion brewing, and carefully drawn diagrams of wand movements for basic charms. A child-sized desk sat beneath the window, its surface marked with ink stains and scorch marks from particularly enthusiastic theoretical experiments. Today's lesson began with magical history, Petunia's favorite subject, because it allowed her to weave together all the fragments of knowledge she had gathered over the years into coherent narratives that would help Harry understand his place in the wizarding world. "Tell me what you remember about the Statute of Secrecy," she said, opening A History of Magic to a chapter they had been working through for several weeks. Harry straightened in his chair, adopting the serious expression he always wore when reciting important information. The Statute of Secrecy was made in 1692, when the witch hunts got really bad, and magical people decided to hide from muggles completely. Before that, wizards and witches and muggles all lived together. But some muggles got scared of magic and hurt magical people, so now we have to be secret. Excellent. And why is that important for you to understand? Because I'm famous in the magical world for defeating you-know-who when I was a baby. But I have to be careful not to let any muggles except Uncle Vernon know about magic, or I could get in trouble with the Ministry of Magic. Petunia nodded approvingly. Harry's understanding of his unique position, caught between the magical and muggle worlds, was crucial to his future safety. She had been careful to explain both the privileges and responsibilities that came with his fame, ensuring he understood that being the boy who lived meant more than just being celebrated. Now, she said, turning to a new section of the book, let's talk about magical education before Hogwarts was founded. Can you imagine what it was like when young witches and wizards had to learn magic from their families, with no formal school to attend? Harry's eyes grew wide with fascination as Petunia described the medieval system of magical apprenticeships, where children with magical ability were often sent away from their families to study with established wizards and witches. She painted vivid pictures of young people learning potion-making in candlelit towers, practicing wand movements in ancient forests, and studying magical theory by copying manuscripts with quills made from phoenix feathers. It sounds lonely, Harry said thoughtfully when she finished, not having a school where lots of magical children could learn together. That's exactly why Hogwarts was so revolutionary when it was founded, Petunia replied. The four founders wanted to create a place where magical children could learn together, where they could make friends and support each other while mastering their abilities. That's why you'll love it there when you're old enough to attend. Will I really be ready for Hogwarts when I turn 11? Harry asked, a note of anxiety creeping into his voice. What if the other children know more magic than me? Petunia had to suppress a smile at the idea of any 11-year-old knowing more about magic than Harry already did. Oh, darling, I think you'll find yourself quite well prepared. But remember, the most important thing about Hogwarts isn't showing off how much you know. It's learning to use your abilities wisely and making friends who will support you throughout your life. After their history lesson, they moved on to practical magical theory. Petunia had developed a system of exercises designed to help Harry understand magical principles without actually casting spells, since he wouldn't receive his wand until his Hogwarts letter arrived. Today's focus was on the relationship between emotion and magical power. Petunia had Harry practice meditation techniques she had adapted from various sources, teaching him to recognize and channel the feelings that triggered his accidental magic. Close your eyes and think about something that makes you really happy, she instructed, watching as Harry's face relaxed into a peaceful expression. Now, instead of letting that happiness just fill you up, imagine gathering it into a ball of light in your chest. Can you feel it getting warmer and brighter? Harry nodded, his breathing steady and controlled. I can see it, he whispered. It's like a little sun, all golden and warm. Perfect. Now, without opening your eyes, reach for that toy dragon on the shelf behind you. Don't think about how you're going to move it. Just imagine that golden light connecting you to the dragon, and wish very gently for it to come to you. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the small wooden dragon on the bookshelf began to quiver, lifting slightly off its perch, before floating gently through the air to land in Harry's outstretched palm. Harry's eyes flew open, and he stared at the dragon in wonder. I did it. I actually did it on purpose. Petunia felt tears prick at her eyes. In all her years of studying magical theory, she had never experienced anything as profound as watching Harry discover his own power. You certainly did, darling. And do you see how much more controlled that was than when your magic happens by accident? It felt different, Harry said, turning the dragon over in his hands. Like I was asking it to move instead of just wanting it to move really hard. That's exactly the difference between accidental magic and trained magic, Petunia explained. When you learn to use a wand at Hogwarts, it will help you focus that intention even more precisely. But the control you're developing now will make you much more powerful than wizards who never learned to understand their magic from the inside. Their afternoon was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Vernon had taken to working longer hours at the drill company, partly to avoid the increasingly obvious signs of magic around the house, and partly because Petunia's transformation into Harry's teacher had left her less available to manage his domestic needs. This meant that visitors during the day were usually Petunia's responsibility. She found a stern-looking woman in emerald robes standing on her doorstep, a pointed hat perched on greying hair, and an expression of barely concealed disapproval on her weathered face. "Mrs. Dursley," the woman said crisply, "I am Professor McGonagall from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I believe we need to discuss young Harry Potter's magical education." Petunia's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression calm. "Of course, Professor. Please come in." McGonagall stepped into the hallway, her sharp eyes taking in the magical charts visible through the open door of Harry's classroom, the carefully organized bookshelves filled with texts on magical theory, and the faint shimmer of controlled magic that seemed to permeate the entire house. "Most interesting," McGonagall murmured. "This is not quite what we expected to find at Privet Drive." Before Petunia could respond, Harry appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by curiosity about their visitor. When he saw McGonagall's robes and pointed hat, his face lit up with excitement rather than fear. "Are you a real witch?" he asked, bounding down the stairs with 5-year-old enthusiasm. "Aunt Petunia told me about Hogwarts professors, but I've never met one before. Can you do transfiguration? Aunt Petunia says that's the hardest kind of magic, because you have to completely understand both the thing you're changing and the thing you're changing it into." McGonagall's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Indeed, Mr. Potter. And what else has your aunt told you about transfiguration?" Harry launched into an enthusiastic explanation of magical theory that would have impressed most first-year Hogwarts students, describing the mathematical principles behind successful transfiguration, the importance of visualization and intent, and the dangers of attempting to transform living creatures without proper training. McGonagall listened with growing amazement, occasionally interjecting questions that Harry answered with the confidence of someone who had spent years thinking deeply about magical concepts. "Fascinating," McGonagall said, when Harry finally paused for breath. "Tell me, Mr. Potter, have you attempted any transfiguration yourself?" "Oh, no," Harry replied seriously. Aunt Petunia explained that trying to do advanced magic without a wand and proper training could be really dangerous. She says I need to understand the theory perfectly before I start practicing, so I won't hurt myself or anyone else. McGonagall turned to Petunia with an expression of grudging respect. "Mrs. Dursley, might I ask where you acquired such extensive knowledge of magical education principles?" Petunia had prepared for this question during her sleepless nights over the past few years, knowing that someday someone from the magical world would come to check on Harry's development. "I loved my sister very much, Professor," she said quietly. "When Lily came home for holidays, I listened to everything she told me about Hogwarts. I asked questions, took notes, and spent years researching magical theory in Muggle libraries and bookshops. I wanted to understand her world, even though I could never be part of it myself." "That's not entirely accurate, is it?" McGonagall asked, her tone gentle but probing. "You wrote to Professor Dumbledore when you were 11, requesting admission to Hogwarts." Petunia felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she met McGonagall's gaze steadily. "Yes, I did. And when he kindly explained that non-magical children couldn't attend, I decided to learn everything I could about magic anyway. I never stopped wanting to understand it. And when Harry came to you, you chose to share that knowledge with him, rather than suppress his magical development as we expected. The accusation in McGonagall's voice sparked anger in Petunia's chest. Expected? You expected me to raise him in ignorance? You expected me to waste his potential and ensure he arrived at Hogwarts knowing nothing about his own heritage? The Dursleys have a reputation for disliking anything unusual, McGonagall said carefully. Professor Dumbledore felt that a normal Muggle upbringing would give Harry the best chance at a humble, grounded childhood. Petunia laughed, the sound sharp with years of suppressed resentment. A normal Muggle upbringing? You mean the kind where magical children are told their abilities are freakish and shameful? Where they're punished for things they can't control? Where they arrive at Hogwarts traumatized and convinced they're burdens on everyone around them? McGonagall's expression softened slightly. That was not the intention. But it would have been the result, Petunia replied firmly. Harry is extraordinary, Professor. He deserves an education that matches his potential, not one designed to limit it for the convenience of adults who think they know what's best for him. Before McGonagall could respond, Harry tugged at Petunia's sleeve. Aunt Petunia, is the Professor angry with us? Did we do something wrong? The innocent concern in his voice seemed to affect McGonagall more than any argument could have. She knelt down to Harry's eye level, her stern expression melting into something approaching warmth. Not at all, Mr. Potter. I'm simply surprised to find you so well educated about magical matters. Your aunt has done something quite remarkable in preparing you for your future studies. Does that mean I can still go to Hogwarts when I'm 11? Harry asked anxiously. Even though I already know some things about magic, McGonagall glanced up at Petunia, then back at Harry. Oh yes, Mr. Potter. You will definitely be welcome at Hogwarts. In fact, I suspect you'll find it even more wonderful than you imagine. After McGonagall left, promising to include a detailed report of Harry's development in his Hogwarts file, Petunia and Harry spent the evening reviewing their lesson plans for the coming months. The unexpected visit had confirmed what Petunia had suspected. Harry's education was progressing far beyond normal expectations, and they would need to accelerate his preparation for the challenges that lay ahead. That night, as she tucked Harry into bed, he looked up at her with serious green eyes. Aunt Petunia, are there other children like me? Other magical children who know about theory and history before they go to Hogwarts? Petunia smoothed his dark hair away from his forehead, considering her answer carefully. There might be some children from old wizarding families who grow up knowing about magic, she said. But darling, I don't think there are many children anywhere who understand magical principles as deeply as you do. Is that good or bad? Harry asked, his voice small. It's wonderful, Petunia assured him. It means you'll be able to help other children learn, and you'll be ready for advanced studies much sooner than most students. But it also means you'll need to be patient with children who haven't had the same preparation you've had. Will they like me anyway? Even if I know more than them? Petunia's heart ached at the vulnerability in his question. Oh, sweetheart, the right friends will like you for who you are, not for how much or how little you know. And the children worth being friends with will appreciate having someone who can help them understand difficult concepts. As Harry drifted off to sleep, Petunia sat beside his bed and reflected on the day's events. McGonagall's visit had been both validation and warning. The magical world was beginning to take notice of Harry's unusual development, which meant their quiet years of preparation were drawing to a close. But she felt no regret for the path they had chosen. Harry was confident, curious, and kind. He possessed a theoretical understanding of magic that would serve him well throughout his life, and more importantly, he had grown up knowing that his abilities were gifts to be treasured, not burdens to be hidden. Tomorrow, she decided, they would begin working on more advanced concepts. Magical ethics, perhaps, or the principles behind warding and protection spells. Harry was ready for deeper knowledge, and Petunia was determined to ensure that when the time came for him to take his place in the magical world, he would be prepared for anything, Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the trees of Privet Drive, carrying with it the promise of changes to come. In 6 more years, Harry would receive his Hogwarts letter and begin the next phase of his magical education. But unlike the Harry Potter of Dumbledore's expectations, this Harry would arrive at Hogwarts not as a lost, ignorant child to be guided and controlled, but as a young scholar ready to claim his heritage and reshape the wizarding world with knowledge, wisdom, and the unshakable confidence that came from being raised with love. The magical world had no idea what was coming, but they would learn soon enough that when Petunia Dursley set her mind on raising the most prepared magical child in history, miracles became not just possible, but inevitable. The morning mist hung low over Little Whinging as 8-year-old Harry Potter stood in the back garden of No. 4 Privet Drive, his arms extended, eyes closed in concentration. The air around him shimmered with barely contained energy, and without warning, every flower in Petunia's prize-winning garden began to bloom simultaneously, their petals unfurling in impossible colors that had never existed in nature before. Harry opened his eyes and gasped at the transformation. Where moments before there had been ordinary autumn roses and chrysanthemums, now brilliant sapphire daffodils nodded alongside silver marigolds and roses that shifted from deep purple to luminous gold as the morning light touched them. "Aunt Petunia!" he called excitedly, his voice carrying the wonder of a child who had just discovered he could paint with starlight. "Look what happened!" Petunia emerged from the kitchen, a steaming cup of tea in her hands, and an expression of delighted amazement on her face. Over the past 3 years, she had grown accustomed to Harry's increasingly sophisticated displays of wandless magic, but this surpassed anything he had accomplished before. "That's extraordinary, darling," she said, kneeling beside him to examine a rose that seemed to contain entire galaxies within its petals. "How did it feel different from your other magic?" Harry considered the question with the seriousness he always applied to magical analysis. "It felt like the magic was much bigger than usual," he explained, his small hands gesturing as he searched for words to describe the experience. "Like instead of just reaching for one thing, I was connected to everything growing at the same time. And the flowers wanted to be more beautiful, so the magic helped them become what they were dreaming of being." Petunia felt a chill of recognition run down her spine. What Harry was describing sounded remarkably similar to accounts she had read of ancient magic, the kind of intuitive spellwork that legends claimed had been common before wands became the standard focus for magical energy. She made a mental note to research historical accounts of wandless magic more thoroughly. If Harry was naturally developing abilities that most adult wizards never mastered, she needed to understand the implications for his future education and safety. Their morning meditation was interrupted by a sharp crack that echoed across the garden, followed by the appearance of a tall wizard in midnight blue robes. Harry recognized him immediately from the photographs Petunia had shown him during their lessons on recent magical history. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said politely, offering a small bow as Petunia had taught him when meeting distinguished magical persons. "Welcome to our home." Dumbledore's blue eyes twinkled behind his half-moon spectacles as he took in the transformed garden, his gaze lingering on the impossible flowers that continued to shift and change colors in the morning light. "Good morning, Harry," Dumbledore said, his voice carrying a note of barely concealed astonishment. "I see you've been practicing your magical exercises." "Actually, Professor," Harry replied with 8-year-old earnestness, "this was an accident. I was trying to help Aunt Petunia's roses grow stronger for winter, but the magic got much bigger than I expected. Aunt Petunia says accidental magic happens when our intentions are good, but our control isn't quite ready for how much power we're using." Dumbledore glanced at Petunia, who had risen from her examination of the transformed flowers to face their unexpected visitor. "Mrs. Dursley," he said carefully, "might I have a word with you about Harry's magical development?" "Of course, Professor," Petunia replied, though her voice carried a note of wariness. "Harry, darling, Why don't you gather some of those lovely flowers for the house while Professor Dumbledore and I have our chat?" As Harry busied himself selecting the most spectacular blooms, Petunia led Dumbledore to the stone bench beneath the old oak tree, where she often conducted Harry's outdoor lessons. "Professor McGonagall's report was quite illuminating," Dumbledore began, settling himself on the bench with the careful movements of someone far older than his appearance suggested. She indicated that Harry's theoretical knowledge of magic is remarkably advanced for his age. "I've tried to give him the best education I could manage," Petunia said quietly, watching Harry as he carefully arranged a bouquet of starlight roses and moonbeam daffodils. "He's so eager to learn, and he seems to understand magical concepts intuitively." "Indeed," Dumbledore murmured, his gaze following hers to where Harry was now attempting to coax a particularly shy silver lily into full bloom. "Tell me, Mrs. Dursley, have you noticed any other unusual manifestations of his abilities?" Petunia hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. The truth was that Harry's magical development had accelerated dramatically over the past year. His wandless magic had evolved from simple object summoning to complex manipulations of light, temperature, and now, apparently, the life force of plants themselves. More concerning was his apparent ability to sense magical signatures in objects and people, something she had only read about in the most advanced texts on magical theory. "He's always been unusually sensitive to magic," she said finally. "He can tell when someone has been using magic in a room, even hours after they've left. And lately, he's been able to sense the magical potential in objects before he's told what they are." Dumbledore's eyebrows rose slightly. "Could you provide an example?" "Last week, when we visited that antique shop in London, the one that occasionally has magical items mixed in with the Muggle antiques, Harry immediately identified a scrying mirror that the shopkeeper didn't even know was magical. He said it felt like looking into deep water, even though it appeared to be an ordinary hand mirror to everyone else." "And how did you know it was indeed a scrying mirror?" Dumbledore asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I've been studying magical theory for 20 years, Professor," Petunia replied with quiet dignity. "I may not be able to cast spells, but I understand magical principles better than many people who attended Hogwarts." Before Dumbledore could respond, Harry approached with his arms full of transformed flowers, his face glowing with excitement. "Professor Dumbledore, look, the magic is still active in them. They're continuing to change, even after I stopped concentrating." He was right. The bouquet in his arms seemed to pulse with inner light, new patterns of color rippling across the petals like aurora dancing in a northern sky. "May I examine one of these flowers, Harry?" Dumbledore asked, extending his hand with the careful respect one might show to an accomplished colleague. Harry selected a rose that currently glowed with soft amber light and placed it gently in Dumbledore's palm. The moment the flower touched the old wizard's skin, it flared brilliantly, its golden glow intensifying until it cast dancing shadows across the entire garden. "Fascinating," Dumbledore breathed, his voice filled with genuine wonder. "Harry, the magic you've imbued in this flower is continuing to draw energy from ambient magical sources. Do you understand what that means?" Harry shook his head, his expression curious but unafraid. "It means your magic has become self-sustaining," Dumbledore explained. "Most magical effects fade when the caster stops concentrating on them. But your magic has created a lasting transformation that continues to strengthen itself. That's a very rare and advanced ability." "Is it dangerous?" Harry asked, glancing at Petunia with concern. "I don't want to hurt anyone with my magic." Dumbledore's expression softened. "Not dangerous, my boy, but certainly extraordinary. Tell me, have you been studying magical theory with your aunt?" "Oh yes," Harry replied enthusiastically. "We read about magical theory every morning, and then we practice meditation and control exercises in the afternoon. Aunt Petunia says understanding why magic works is just as important as learning how to cast spells." "And what magical theories have you been studying lately?" Dumbledore inquired, settling back on the bench as if preparing for a lengthy discussion. Harry launched into an explanation of sympathetic magic, describing how magical practitioners could create connections between objects based on similarity or contact, and how those connections could be used to transfer energy or information across great distances. His understanding of the theoretical framework was sophisticated enough to impress most seventh-year students, but what truly astonished Dumbledore was the practical applications Harry had intuited. "So when I was trying to help the flowers grow," Harry continued, "I think I accidentally created sympathetic connections between all the plants in the garden. That's why they all changed together instead of just the roses I was focusing on. And maybe the reason they keep changing is because the connections are still active, so they're sharing magical energy with each other." Dumbledore exchanged a meaningful glance with Petunia. "That's a remarkably sophisticated analysis, Harry. Have you tested this theory?" "Not exactly tested," Harry said thoughtfully. "But yesterday when I was practicing with Aunt Petunia's practice stones, I tried to make a connection between two pieces of quartz. When I warmed one with my magic, the other one got warm too, even though it was on the other side of the room." Petunia felt her heart skip a beat. She had read about magical experimentation of that type, but it was typically performed by advanced researchers with years of training and proper safety protocols. The fact that Harry had developed the technique independently at age 8 was both thrilling and terrifying. "Harry," Dumbledore said carefully, "I wonder if you might demonstrate this connection technique for me. Nothing elaborate, just a simple link between two objects." Harry looked to Petunia for permission, and she nodded despite her concerns. Better to have Dumbledore witness Harry's abilities in a controlled setting than to have him discover them accidentally under less ideal circumstances. Harry selected 2 fallen leaves from the oak tree, holding one in each hand as he closed his eyes and entered the meditative state Petunia had taught him. The air around him began to shimmer again, but this time the energy felt more focused, more deliberate. After a moment of concentration, Harry opened his eyes and handed one leaf to Dumbledore while retaining the other. "Now watch," he said, and gently touched his leaf with the tip of his finger. The leaf in Dumbledore's hand responded immediately, curling slightly at the exact spot where Harry had touched his own leaf. When Harry stroked the edge of his leaf, Dumbledore's leaf mimicked the movement perfectly. "Remarkable," Dumbledore murmured, studying the leaf with the intensity of a scholar encountering an entirely new branch of magic. "Harry, how long do these connections typically last?" Harry tilted his head consideringly. "The one with the flowers is still active, and that was this morning. The stones yesterday stayed connected until I went to sleep, but they weren't connected when I woke up. So maybe the magic fades when I'm not conscious to maintain it." "That suggests a level of magical control that most adult wizards never achieve," Dumbledore observed. "Mrs. Dursley, has Harry shown any other unusual abilities?" Petunia hesitated again, but the gentle encouragement in Dumbledore's expression convinced her to share more details of Harry's development. "He seems to have an intuitive understanding of magical safety principles," she said. "When we visit shops that carry magical items, he can sense which objects might be dangerous and instinctively avoids touching them. And last month, when Mrs. Fig's cat got injured, Harry was able to ease its pain by holding it and somehow directing healing energy through his hands." Dumbledore leaned forward with renewed interest. "He performed healing magic without a wand or formal training." "It wasn't formal healing magic," Petunia clarified quickly. "More like he was able to share his own life energy with the injured animal to help it recover more quickly. The cat was completely healed within hours instead of the weeks the veterinarian had predicted." Harry nodded earnestly. "It felt like the cat was cold inside where it was hurt, so I tried to share some of my warmth with it." "I didn't know that was healing magic, though. I thought healing was much more complicated than that." "In one sense, it is far more complicated," Dumbledore replied thoughtfully. "Formal healing magic requires years of study and practice to master safely. But what you've described sounds like a very ancient and intuitive form of healing that predates modern magical medicine. Some scholars believe it was the original form of magical healing, before witches and wizards developed more structured approaches. As the morning progressed, Dumbledore conducted an increasingly thorough assessment of Harry's abilities. What he discovered challenged many of his assumptions about magical development and education. Harry possessed not just advanced theoretical knowledge, but practical abilities that suggested a fundamental understanding of magic that most wizards spent decades trying to achieve. More importantly, Harry's approach to magic was characterized by an ethical framework that prioritized helping others and avoiding harm. Every spell he had developed independently, every magical experiment he had conducted, had been motivated by a desire to solve problems or ease suffering, rather than to display his power or satisfy his curiosity. "Professor," Harry said, during a break in the impromptu testing session, "may I ask you something about Hogwarts?" "Of course, my boy. Aunt Petunia has taught me so much about magical theory, and I love learning new things. But will the professors at Hogwarts be upset that I already know advanced concepts? I don't want them to think I'm showing off, or that I don't need to attend classes." Dumbledore's expression grew warm with affection and respect. "Harry, the professors at Hogwarts will be delighted to work with a student who brings such enthusiasm and understanding to his studies. And I suspect they will find that even with your advanced preparation, there will be much for you to learn in a formal, magical environment. But what if the other students think I'm strange, because I know more than them?" Harry's voice carried the universal anxiety of a child worried about fitting in with his peers. "The right sort of friends will value your knowledge because of how you use it to help others," Dumbledore replied gently. "And I suspect you'll find that sharing your understanding with classmates who are struggling will be one of the most rewarding aspects of your Hogwarts experience." As Dumbledore prepared to leave, he turned to Petunia with an expression of profound gratitude. "Mrs. Dursley, what you have accomplished in Harry's education is nothing short of miraculous. You have given him not just knowledge, but wisdom, not just power, but the ethical framework to use it responsibly." "I've only tried to give him the education I wished I could have had myself," Petunia replied quietly. "He deserves to understand his abilities and heritage, not to be kept ignorant for the convenience of others." Indeed, Dumbledore agreed. And when Harry arrives at Hogwarts in 3 years, he will be better prepared for the challenges ahead than any student in the school's history. After Dumbledore departed with another sharp crack, Petunia and Harry spent the afternoon reviewing the morning's events and discussing what they had learned about his developing abilities. "Harry," she said, as they sat among the still transforming flowers, "you understand that your magical abilities are quite unusual, even for the wizarding world." Harry nodded solemnly. "Professor Dumbledore seemed surprised by some of the things I can do. Does that mean I'm different from other magical children?" "It means you're extraordinary, darling," Petunia replied, smoothing his perpetually untidy hair. "But extraordinary abilities come with extraordinary responsibilities. The more powerful your magic becomes, the more important it is to use it wisely and carefully." "I want to use my magic to help people," Harry said, with the simple conviction of a child who had been raised to value kindness above all else. Like Mum and Dad did when they fought you-know-who. "I want to make sure no one gets hurt, because I didn't do enough to protect them." Petunia felt tears prick at her eyes. "That's exactly the attitude that will make you a truly great wizard, Harry. Not the strength of your magic, but the love that guides how you choose to use it." As evening fell over Privet Drive, Harry practiced his meditation exercises among the transformed flowers while Petunia sat nearby, updating her journals with detailed observations about his latest magical developments. The garden around them pulsed with gentle light, a testament to magic guided by love and wisdom rather than ambition or fear. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities for Harry to explore the boundaries of his extraordinary abilities. But tonight it was enough to sit in a garden transformed by wonder and plan for the remarkable future that awaited them both. The wizarding world had no idea what was coming when Harry Potter finally arrived at Hogwarts. But they would learn soon enough that when exceptional magical ability was paired with loving guidance and ethical education, miracles became not just possible, but inevitable. The trunk had remained hidden in the attic of No. 4 Privet Drive for 8 years, tucked behind old Christmas decorations and Vernon's abandoned exercise equipment. Petunia had almost forgotten it existed until Harry's 9th birthday approached, and she realized it was time to share the most precious gift she could give him, his true inheritance. On a crisp September morning, while Vernon was at work and the house was quiet, Petunia led Harry up the narrow staircase to the dusty attic space. Sunlight filtered through the small window, casting dancing patterns across the accumulated possessions of their suburban life. "There's something very special I've been saving for when you were old enough to understand its significance," she told Harry, her voice carrying a mixture of anticipation and sorrow. "Something that belonged to your parents." Harry's green eyes widened with excitement and curiosity. He had seen photographs of James and Lily Potter, had heard stories about their magical abilities and their sacrifice to protect him, but physical objects that had actually belonged to them were precious beyond measure. Petunia moved aside a stack of old boxes and revealed a magnificent trunk made of dark wood, inlaid with silver symbols that seemed to shift and move in the dusty light. The metal clasps were inscribed with intricate runes, and the entire trunk radiated the unmistakable warmth of active magic. "This was your mother's school trunk, and later her research chest," Petunia explained, running her fingers along the smooth wood with reverent care. After she graduated from Hogwarts, Lily used it to store her most important magical research and the materials she collected during her advanced studies. Harry approached the trunk with the careful respect he had learned to show all magical objects. Even without touching it, he could sense the layers of protective enchantments woven into its construction and the profound magical resonance of the contents within. "The trunk recognizes you as Lily's heir," Petunia continued, kneeling beside the magnificent chest. "Place your hand on the silver nameplate and think about wanting to learn about your mother's work." Harry pressed his small palm against the cool metal, and immediately the trunk responded to his touch. The silver symbols flared with warm light, the runes rearranged themselves into new patterns, and the clasps clicked open with musical chimes that seemed to echo with Lily's own laughter. Inside, the trunk was far larger than its exterior dimensions should have allowed, with multiple compartments and sections that extended deeper than seemed physically possible. The scent of parchment and dried herbs rose from within, accompanied by the distinctive shimmer of preserved magic. The first section contained Lily's personal journals from her Hogwarts years, leather-bound volumes filled with her neat handwriting and detailed observations about magical theory and practical applications. Petunia lifted one carefully and opened it to a random page, revealing diagrams of wand movements alongside notes about the mathematical relationships between magical energy and physical transformations. "Your mother was brilliant," Petunia said softly, her voice thick with emotion and pride. Even as a student, she was developing magical theories that her professors found remarkable. "Look at this entry about protective magic." Harry leaned close to read over her shoulder, his reading ability now advanced enough to understand most of the technical language Lily had used. The journal entry described experiments with creating magical shields that could not only deflect harmful spells, but actually transform them into beneficial energy. "She was trying to figure out how to turn dark magic into healing magic," Harry said with wonder. "That's incredibly complex theoretical work. Your mother never believed that any magic was inherently evil," Petunia explained. "She thought that with enough understanding and the right intentions, even the darkest curses could be transformed into something that helped rather than harmed." They spent the morning exploring the contents of the trunk's first compartment, discovering journals that traced Lily's intellectual development from eager first-year student to accomplished magical researcher. Her early entries were filled with basic observations and careful copying of established theories. But by her final year at Hogwarts, she was proposing original research that challenged fundamental assumptions about magical practice. "Look at this," Harry said excitedly, pointing to a diagram in one of Lily's 7th-year journals. "She's describing the same kind of sympathetic connections I've been working with, but she's applying them to potion ingredients to increase their potency." Indeed she was, Petunia confirmed, feeling a familiar surge of pride in her sister's intellectual achievements. And if you look at the next page, you'll see that she successfully tested the theory with a batch of strengthening solution that was 3 times more effective than the standard recipe. The second compartment of the trunk contained Lily's advanced potions equipment and her collection of rare ingredients. Harry examined the delicate silver stirring rods, the collection of cauldrons in various sizes and materials, and the carefully labelled vials of substances he recognized from his theoretical studies. Most fascinating were Lily's experimental potions notes, which revealed her systematic approach to improving established recipes and developing entirely new formulations. She had been particularly interested in healing potions and protective drafts, always seeking ways to make magical medicine more effective and accessible. She created a modified version of Pepper-Up potion that not only cured common colds, but actually strengthened the immune system for weeks afterward, Petunia explained, showing Harry the detailed recipe cards in Lily's precise handwriting. The healers at St. Mungo's were very interested in her work. The third compartment held James Potter's contributions to their shared magical research. While Lily had focused on potions and protective magic, James had specialized in defensive spells and aura training techniques. His notes revealed a systematic mind devoted to understanding how magic could be used to protect the innocent and apprehend dangerous criminals. "Your father was one of the most naturally talented duelists of his generation," Petunia told Harry, as they examined James's detailed analyses of combat magic. "But what made him truly exceptional was his commitment to finding ways to subdue opponents without causing permanent harm." Harry studied James's diagrams of stunning spells that could be modified to minimize trauma, binding hexes that restrained without causing pain, and shield charms that could protect multiple people simultaneously. Every technique showed evidence of careful thought about ethical applications of potentially dangerous magic. He developed this variation of the disarming charm that not only removes an opponent's wand, but also temporarily prevents them from summoning it back, James's notes explained in his bold handwriting. The effect lasts long enough for proper restraints to be applied, but causes no lasting magical damage. "That's the kind of innovative thinking that made your parents such formidable opponents of dark wizards," Petunia observed. "They never relied on causing greater harm than their enemies. Instead, they developed superior techniques that allowed them to win through skill and strategy rather than brutality." The fourth compartment contained the most precious treasures of all, collaborative research that James and Lily had conducted together during their final years. Their combined expertise in protective magic had led to breakthrough discoveries about magical shields and defensive enchantments. "Here," Petunia said with reverence, her fingers tracing over a thick manuscript bound in midnight blue leather. "This is their work on family protection magic, the research that ultimately saved your life." Harry's breath caught as he read the title page. "Advanced Theories in Blood-Based Protective Enchantments, a study of sacrificial magic and its applications to long-term defense protocols." The date showed it had been completed just months before his parents' deaths. The manuscript revealed that James and Lily had spent years researching the theoretical foundations of the ancient magic that had protected Harry from Voldemort's killing curse. They had understood, far better than most wizards, that the deepest magical protections were powered not by technical skill, but by love and willing sacrifice. "Your mother's protection wasn't accidental," Petunia explained, her voice heavy with emotion. "She and your father had studied this type of magic extensively. When she chose to die rather than step aside and let Voldemort kill you, she was deliberately invoking one of the most powerful forms of defensive magic known to exist." Harry read through sections of the manuscript with growing understanding and amazement. His parents hadn't just been talented young wizards who happened to defy Voldemort successfully. They had been serious magical researchers whose work had direct applications to the war against dark forces. More importantly, their research revealed approaches to magic that aligned perfectly with the ethical framework Petunia had been teaching Harry. Every experiment they described was designed to protect the innocent, heal the injured, or find peaceful solutions to magical conflicts. "They would have been so proud of your magical development," Petunia said, as Harry absorbed page after page of his parents' collaborative research. "Your approach to magic, your focus on helping rather than harming, your instinctive understanding of ethical applications, all of that reflects the values they shared." The final section of the trunk contained items that had belonged to both James and Lily during their school years: textbooks with margin notes that revealed their learning processes, practical equipment they had used for magical experiments, and personal letters that showed their growing relationship and shared commitment to fighting dark magic. Harry found himself particularly drawn to a collection of letters James had written to Lily during their 7th year, when they were head boy and head girl respectively. The correspondence revealed James's evolution from attention-seeking teenager to mature young man, and Lily's gradual recognition that his character had fundamentally changed from their earlier school years. "He wasn't always the person he became," Petunia explained when Harry asked about the transformation the letters revealed. "Your father spent his first few years at Hogwarts being rather arrogant and showing off constantly. But Lily's influence, combined with the growing threat of Voldemort, helped him develop into someone truly worthy of her respect and love." "So people can change their fundamental character?" Harry asked thoughtfully, "even if they start out making poor choices? With enough motivation and the right influences?" "Yes," Petunia confirmed. "Your father is proof that people can grow beyond their early mistakes if they genuinely commit to becoming better versions of themselves." As they explored the deeper sections of the trunk, Harry discovered that his parents had been part of a network of young witches and wizards who were developing new approaches to magical defense and healing. Their correspondence with friends and mentors revealed a community of scholars united by their commitment to protecting the innocent and advancing magical knowledge for beneficial purposes. Professor Dumbledore wasn't just their headmaster, Petunia explained, as Harry read letters that showed the depth of respect between the young couple and the older wizard. He was their mentor in the truest sense, guiding their research and helping them understand how their magical abilities could serve the greater good. Near the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in preservation charms that had kept it perfectly intact, Harry found his parents' joint thesis project, a comprehensive manual of protective enchantments that they had developed specifically for families threatened by dark wizards. The manual included theoretical explanations, step-by-step casting instructions, and detailed analyses of how to modify standard protection spells for maximum effectiveness. "This is incredible," Harry breathed as he read through sections about home warding, family shields, and emergency escape protocols. They developed an entire system of magical defenses that ordinary families could use to protect themselves from dark wizards. They were planning to publish it after the war ended, Petunia said sadly. They wanted to ensure that no family would be defenseless against the kind of attacks Voldemort and his followers were conducting. As the afternoon wore on, Harry absorbed information that fundamentally changed his understanding of his parents and his own potential future. James and Lily Potter hadn't just been victims of Voldemort's war, they had been active participants in developing the magical knowledge and defensive techniques that would ultimately be needed to defeat dark forces. More importantly, their approach to magic provided a perfect model for how Harry could use his own extraordinary abilities. Every spell they had developed, every research project they had pursued, every magical innovation they had created, had been motivated by love and the desire to protect others. "Aunt Petunia," Harry said, as they carefully began repacking the trunk's precious contents, "I want to continue their work. I want to learn how to use my magic the way they used theirs, to protect people and make the magical world safer." Petunia smiled through tears of pride and sorrow. That's exactly what they would have wanted for you, darling. Not fame or power or recognition, but the wisdom to use your gifts in service of others. Will you help me understand their research well enough to build on it? Harry asked earnestly. I know I'm still young, but I want to start learning now, so I'll be ready to make a real difference when I'm older. We'll study every page of their work together, Petunia promised, and by the time you arrive at Hogwarts, you'll understand not just magical theory in general, but your parents' specific innovations and how they can be developed further. As they closed the trunk and prepared to return it to its hiding place, Harry felt a profound sense of connection to his parents that went beyond the genetic bond they shared. He understood now that his magical abilities weren't just inherited talents to be developed for their own sake, but tools that could carry forward a legacy of protection and healing. The knowledge contained in his parents' research would guide his magical education for years to come, providing not just technical instruction, but a moral framework for how extraordinary power should be used. When Harry Potter finally arrived at Hogwarts, he would bring with him not only advanced theoretical knowledge, but a clear understanding of his responsibility to use that knowledge wisely. That evening, as Harry practiced his meditation exercises in the transformed garden, while reviewing his parents' notes on magical focus and concentration, Petunia sat nearby and updated her journals with observations about his emotional and intellectual development. The day's discoveries had marked a crucial transition in his understanding of himself and his magical heritage. Tomorrow would bring new lessons based on James and Lily's research, new opportunities to develop the protective magic that had saved his life, and new preparations for the remarkable future that awaited him. But tonight, it was enough to know that Harry Potter was not just learning to become a powerful wizard, but following in the footsteps of parents who had shown him the true meaning of magical greatness. The wizarding world had no idea that the boy who lived was being raised on a foundation of love, wisdom, and revolutionary magical research. But they would learn soon enough that when exceptional ability was guided by his parents' legacy of protection and sacrifice, miracles became not just possible, but inevitable. The owl arrived on a Tuesday morning in July, its tawny feathers gleaming in the summer sunlight as it tapped insistently on the kitchen window of number 4 Privet Drive. Harry Potter, now 11 years old and tall for his age, looked up from his advanced reading on magical theory with excitement dancing in his emerald eyes. "The Hogwarts letter," he said to Petunia, who was preparing their morning tea with the careful precision that had become her hallmark over the years of nurturing Harry's exceptional education. After all these years of preparation, it's finally time. Petunia's hands trembled slightly as she opened the window to admit the magnificent owl, which perched regally on the back of Vernon's chair and extended its leg with the bearing of a creature accustomed to delivering momentous news. The thick envelope bore the familiar Hogwarts crest, and Harry's name was written in emerald ink across the parchment in McGonagall's distinctive handwriting. "Mr. H. Potter," Harry read aloud, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "The cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey." Harry paused, frowning at the address line. "That's odd. I've never lived in a cupboard under the stairs." Petunia felt a chill of recognition and anger. Someone at Hogwarts had made assumptions about Harry's living situation based on expectations about how the Dursleys would treat him. The casual cruelty of that assumption, the willingness to believe a child would be housed in a cupboard, revealed disturbing attitudes about Muggle families and their capacity for love. "Ignore that error, darling," she said firmly. "Open the letter properly." Harry broke the wax seal and unfolded the parchment, reading the formal acceptance letter with growing excitement. His hands moved to the supply list, and his expression shifted from joy to confusion as he scanned the required textbooks. "Aunt Petunia," he said slowly, "these books are all first-year texts. The Standard Book of Spells Grade 1, A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, 1,000 magical herbs and fungi. I mastered most of this material years ago. Petunia examined the list with growing concern. After 6 years of advanced magical education, Harry's knowledge far exceeded what these introductory texts could provide. He had already studied magical theory equivalent to New T level, understood complex principles that most 7th-year students struggled with, and demonstrated practical abilities that amazed even Dumbledore. The assumption that he would begin his formal education with basic primers was not just inadequate, it was potentially stifling to his continued intellectual development. Before she could respond, another owl appeared at the window, this one bearing the distinctive scarlet and gold colors of Gryffindor House. The letter it carried was addressed in Dumbledore's familiar, spidery handwriting. "Dear Harry and Mrs. Dursley," the letter began, "I hope this finds you both well and excited about the approaching school year. Professor McGonagall and I have been discussing Harry's unique educational background and the remarkable preparation he has received under Mrs. Dursley's guidance. We would very much like to meet with you both before the start of term to discuss how best to accommodate Harry's advanced abilities within the Hogwarts curriculum. Would you be available for a meeting at the school this coming Saturday afternoon?" Harry looked up from the letter with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "They want to meet about my education level. Do you think they're concerned that I won't fit in with the other students?" "I think they're trying to determine how to challenge you appropriately," Petunia replied, though she shared his concerns about the social implications of his advanced preparation. The last thing they want is a bored student who already knows the material being taught. Saturday's meeting at Hogwarts proved to be one of the most significant conversations of Harry's young life. Professor McGonagall met them at the main entrance, her expression revealing barely concealed amazement as she observed Harry's respectful but confident bearing, and his immediate recognition of architectural details that most new students would overlook entirely. "The Great Hall is even more magnificent than the photographs in Hogwarts." "A history suggested," Harry said, as they crossed the entrance hall, his voice filled with genuine wonder rather than nervous excitement. "The enchanted ceiling must require constant maintenance to keep the weather illusions properly synchronized with the outdoor conditions." McGonagall exchanged a meaningful glance with Dumbledore, who had appeared beside them with his characteristic silent approach. "Most 11-year-olds are overwhelmed by the magic itself," she murmured. "This young man is analyzing the technical implementation." They were ushered into a comfortable chamber off the main corridor, where tea had been arranged alongside an impressive collection of advanced magical texts. Dumbledore's blue eyes twinkled as he gestured for them to be seated. "Harry," he began without preamble, "we find ourselves in an unusual situation. Your theoretical knowledge and practical abilities far exceed what we typically see in incoming students. Indeed, from Professor McGonagall's assessments and my own observations, your understanding of magical principles approaches that of our most advanced pupils." Harry shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Does that mean I can't attend Hogwarts with other children my age? I've been looking forward to making friends with people who share my interests in magical learning." "Quite the contrary," Dumbledore assured him. "We want very much for you to have the full Hogwarts experience, including the friendships and collaborative learning that make our school special. But we also want to ensure that your education continues to challenge and inspire you." McGonagall leaned forward, her expression serious but encouraging. "We're proposing a modified curriculum that would allow you to attend regular classes with your year-mates for subjects where social learning is most valuable, while providing advanced independent study opportunities in areas where your knowledge has progressed beyond the standard syllabus. For example," Dumbledore continued, "you might attend first-year potions with Professor Snape, as brewing techniques benefit from hands-on practice regardless of theoretical knowledge. But your defense against the dark arts instruction could draw from much more advanced materials, given your remarkable intuitive understanding of protective magic." "What about making friends with other students?" Harry asked, voicing the concern that had worried him most about his unusual educational background. Will they think I'm strange or showing off if I know more than they do? Petunia reached over to squeeze his hand. The right friends will appreciate your knowledge because of how you use it to help them learn, she reminded him. And from everything we've heard about Hogwarts, there will be plenty of students who are eager to form study groups and share what they know. Indeed, McGonagall confirmed. Some of our most popular students have been those who generously shared their expertise with classmates who needed extra help. Your advanced preparation could be a gift to other young witches and wizards who are struggling with difficult concepts. The conversation continued for over an hour as they worked out the details of Harry's unique academic program. He would be officially enrolled as a first-year student and sorted into a house with his age mates, but his coursework would be individually tailored to provide appropriate challenges while maintaining opportunities for peer interaction. More importantly, the professors seemed genuinely excited about working with a student who brought such depth of understanding to his magical education. Rather than viewing Harry's advanced preparation as a problem to be managed, they saw it as an opportunity to explore teaching methods that could benefit other exceptional students in the future. There is one other matter we should discuss, Dumbledore said, as their meeting neared its conclusion. Harry, your unique background and abilities may attract attention from various quarters of the wizarding world. Some people may try to use your fame or your knowledge for their own purposes. Harry's expression grew serious, the look of someone much older than his 11 years. Aunt Petunia taught me about that possibility. She said that being the boy who lived means some people will expect me to solve their problems or support their causes, even when I'm not qualified to make those decisions. A wise observation, Dumbledore replied approvingly. The temptation to exploit exceptional young people for political or personal gain is unfortunately common in our world. Your aunt has prepared you well to recognize and resist such pressures. Petunia felt a surge of protective pride. I wanted Harry to understand that his fame comes with responsibilities, but also with the right to make his own choices about how to fulfill those responsibilities. No one should be able to manipulate him into actions he hasn't chosen freely. As they prepared to leave Hogwarts, McGonagall handed Harry a modified supply list that reflected his advanced curriculum. Instead of basic textbooks, he would need intermediate and advanced texts in several subjects, specialized equipment for independent research projects, and access to the restricted section of the library under faculty supervision. I've never seen a first-year student receive library privileges of this scope, McGonagall observed. But then again, I've never worked with a first-year student who could discuss the theoretical foundations of transfiguration at this level of sophistication. The journey home to Privet Drive was filled with excited planning as Harry and Petunia discussed the implications of his modified Hogwarts program. The professor's willingness to accommodate his advanced abilities while preserving opportunities for normal social development had exceeded their best hopes for his educational experience. More significantly, Harry's confidence about fitting into the Hogwarts community had been reinforced by the faculty's obvious enthusiasm for working with him. Instead of being viewed as a problem student who needed to be managed or contained, he was seen as an exciting opportunity to explore new approaches to magical education. That evening, as they reviewed his new reading list and planned their upcoming trip to Diagon Alley for supplies, Harry reflected on the day's revelations about his approaching Hogwarts experience. "Aunt Petunia," he said thoughtfully, "I used to worry that all the preparation you gave me might make it harder to connect with other students. But now I think it might actually help me be a better friend to them." "How so, darling?" "Because I understand how wonderful it feels to really comprehend magical principles, to have that moment when a difficult concept suddenly makes perfect sense. If I can help other students experience that same joy of understanding, then my advanced preparation becomes something I can share rather than something that sets me apart." Petunia felt tears of pride prick at her eyes. "That attitude will make you not just a successful student, but a true leader among your peers. The kind of person who uses knowledge to lift others up, rather than to demonstrate superiority. As they made final preparations for Harry's transition to Hogwarts, both aunt and nephew felt a sense of completion mixed with anticipation. The years of careful preparation, advanced study, and character development had reached their intended conclusion. Harry was ready not just academically, but emotionally for the challenges and opportunities that awaited him. The modified curriculum would allow him to continue growing intellectually while developing the social connections that would sustain him throughout his magical education. More importantly, the faculty's recognition of his exceptional abilities came with clear expectations about using those abilities responsibly and generously. When Harry Potter finally walked through the doors of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, he would arrive not as the ignorant, overwhelmed child that some had expected, but as a young scholar prepared to contribute meaningfully to the magical community while continuing his own remarkable development. The wizarding world was about to discover that proper preparation, loving guidance, and ethical education could transform even the most exceptional abilities into tools for building a better future for everyone. Saturday evening found them in Harry's study, surrounded by his parents' research materials and his own advanced texts, planning the final phase of preparation before his Hogwarts adventure began. Outside, the summer wind carried the promise of change through the gardens of Privet Drive, and in the distance, the ancient castle of Hogwarts waited to welcome its most remarkable student in generations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and the beginning of adventures that would reshape both Harry's life and the entire wizarding world. But tonight, it was enough to know that love, wisdom, and careful preparation had created something truly extraordinary. A young wizard ready to fulfill his potential while remaining true to the values that had shaped his character. The letter from Dumbledore had been more than an invitation to discuss curriculum modifications. It had been recognition that Harry Potter represented a new model for magical education, one that combined exceptional ability with ethical grounding and genuine care for others. When September 1st finally arrived, Harry would board the Hogwarts Express, not as a bewildered child thrust into an unfamiliar world, but as a prepared young scholar ready to claim his place in the magical community, while honoring the legacy of love and sacrifice that had brought him safely to this moment. The wizarding world had no idea what was coming, but they would learn soon enough that when extraordinary preparation met extraordinary character, the result was not just a successful student, but a transformative force that would benefit everyone lucky enough to encounter it. The morning air in Diagon Alley carried the familiar sense of magical commerce. Parchment and ink from Flourish and Blots, the metallic tang of enchanted objects from various specialty shops, and the warm aroma of fresh pastries from the cafes that catered to witches and wizards conducting their daily business. Harry Potter walked beside Petunia through the bustling cobblestone street, his 11-year-old frame tall and confident, green eyes bright with the anticipation of someone finally claiming his rightful place in the magical world. This was not Harry's first visit to Diagon Alley. Petunia had been bringing him here regularly since he was 5 years old, carefully introducing him to the magical community and ensuring he understood the social dynamics, commercial customs, and cultural expectations he would encounter as an adult wizard. But today felt different. Today, he was shopping for Hogwarts supplies as an accepted student, no longer a curious child observing from the margins, but a young scholar preparing to take his place at the most prestigious magical school in Britain. The familiar shopkeepers greeted them with warm recognition as they made their way toward Flourish and Blots. Mrs. Chapman, who ran the small apothecary where Petunia had purchased ingredients for Harry's theoretical potion studies, waved from her doorway. Mr. Whitworth, the elderly wizard who operated a shop specializing in magical instruments, nodded approvingly as Harry paused to examine a new shipment of precision scales designed for advanced potion work. Young Mr. Potter. Mr. Whitworth called out, his voice carrying the pleased tone of someone watching a long-time customer reach an important milestone. Off to Hogwarts at last, I see. Your aunt tells me you've been accepted with special academic accommodations. Yes, sir, Harry replied politely, his manner reflecting years of Petunia's instruction in proper magical etiquette. The professors have arranged a modified curriculum that will challenge me appropriately while allowing me to learn alongside other students my age. Excellent. Excellent, Mr. Whitworth beamed. I've had the pleasure of watching you develop into quite the young scholar over the years. Hogwarts is fortunate to have you. As they entered Flourish and Blots, the familiar sensation of being surrounded by thousands of magical texts filled Harry with his usual sense of wonder and possibility. The shop had expanded significantly since his early childhood visits, with new sections dedicated to advanced theoretical works and specialized research materials. The proprietor, Mr. Blott, approached them with a smile of genuine pleasure. Mrs. Dursley, young Harry, he said warmly, shaking hands with both of them. I have your modified supply list ready, and I must say, it's the most impressive collection of texts I've ever assembled for a first-year student. Harry examined the carefully prepared stack of books with growing excitement. Instead of the basic primers listed in the standard Hogwarts letter, his collection included intermediate and advanced texts that would support his accelerated curriculum. Advanced Theory of Magical Defense by Wilbert Slinkard, Intermediate Transfiguration Principles by Emmerich Switch, and A Comprehensive Guide to Magical Ethics by Adalbert Waffling. More intriguing were the specialized research volumes that Dumbledore had personally recommended: Ancient Runes for Advanced Students, Theoretical Foundations of Arithmancy, and a beautifully bound copy of Secrets of the Darkest Art, with a special note that it was to be studied only under faculty supervision. Professor Dumbledore was very specific about this last one, Mr. Blott explained, handling the dark tome with obvious respect and caution. He said that given your exceptional preparation and the current political climate, you should understand the theoretical foundations of dark magic in order to develop more effective defenses against it. Petunia nodded approvingly. Knowledge of how dark magic works is essential for developing protection against it, she agreed. James and Lily's research emphasized the importance of understanding your opponent's capabilities thoroughly. As Harry examined his new books, a familiar voice called out from across the shop. Harry Potter? Is that really you? Harry turned to see a girl about his own age approaching with obvious excitement, her bushy brown hair framing an intelligent face, and her arms filled with what appeared to be far more books than the standard first-year list would require. I'm Hermione Granger, the girl said, extending her hand with the confident manner of someone accustomed to making new friends through shared intellectual interests. I've read about you, of course, in modern magical history, and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. Harry shook her hand with a smile, immediately recognizing a kindred spirit in academic enthusiasm. It's wonderful to meet you, Hermione. I see you're preparing for Hogwarts as well. That's quite an impressive collection of books you've gathered. Hermione's face lit up with pleasure at finding someone who appreciated her dedication to thorough preparation. Oh yes, I've been reading everything I could find about magical theory and Hogwarts history ever since I received my letter. I want to be as prepared as possible for what we'll be studying. That's an excellent approach, Harry agreed warmly. Have you had any opportunity to study magical theory before receiving your Hogwarts acceptance? Well, I've read Hogwarts, a history cover to cover 3 times, and I've worked through most of the first-year spell books, though of course I can't practice the actual magic without a wand. Hermione paused, looking slightly embarrassed. I know it might seem excessive, but I want to prove that someone from a non-magical family can excel at magical studies. Harry's expression grew serious and supportive. There's nothing excessive about wanting to excel, Hermione. In fact, I think you'll find that your dedication to preparation will serve you very well at Hogwarts. Petunia, who had been listening to their conversation with growing approval, stepped forward to introduce herself. I'm Petunia Dursley, Harry's aunt. It's lovely to meet another young person who appreciates the importance of thorough academic preparation. Thank you, Mrs. Dursley, Hermione replied, clearly pleased by the approval of an adult who supported her scholarly ambitions. "Are you familiar with magical education yourself?" "I've spent many years studying magical theory. Though I'm not magical myself," Petunia explained. "I wanted to ensure that Harry received the best possible preparation for his magical education." Hermione's eyes widened with interest and respect. "That's wonderful. It must have required tremendous dedication to master magical theory without being able to practice the spells yourself." As the three of them continued browsing through Flourish and Blots, Harry found himself genuinely impressed by Hermione's breadth of knowledge and her thoughtful questions about magical principles. She had clearly spent considerable time thinking deeply about the theoretical foundations of magic, and her insights often revealed connections between different subjects that showed sophisticated understanding. More importantly, her attitude toward learning aligned perfectly with the values Petunia had instilled in Harry. Hermione was driven by genuine curiosity and the desire to understand magic thoroughly, not by any need to prove her superiority or gain advantage over other students. "Have you given much thought to which house you might be sorted into?" Hermione asked, as they examined a display of advanced charms texts. "I've read about all 4 houses extensively," Harry replied thoughtfully. "I think each one has admirable qualities, though I suspect my parents' legacy might influence the Sorting Hat's decision." "Your parents were in Gryffindor, weren't they?" Hermione said. "I read about their work in the resistance against you-know-who. They were remarkably brave and accomplished for such young people." "They were," Harry agreed, his voice carrying pride and sadness in equal measure. "My aunt has preserved their magical research, and I've been studying their approaches to defensive magic and protective enchantments. They believed that magical knowledge should always be used to protect others, rather than to gain power for oneself." "That's a beautiful philosophy," Hermione said sincerely. "I hope we end up in the same house. I'd love to continue discussing magical theory with someone who shares that kind of ethical approach to learning." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another family, shopping for Hogwarts supplies. A tall, red-haired boy, about Harry's age, was examining the first-year textbook display with obvious reluctance, while his mother, a pleasantly plump woman with the same distinctive red hair, checked items off a well-worn shopping list. "Ron, stop fidgeting and help me find your potions text," the woman said, with the patient exasperation of someone managing multiple children in a crowded shop. The boy, Ron, glanced over at Harry and Hermione with curiosity and mild relief at finding other people his age in the store. His gaze lingered on Harry's distinctive lightning bolt scar, and recognition dawned in his expression. "Blimey," he said quietly. "You're Harry Potter, aren't you?" "I am," Harry replied, with the easy friendliness he had learned to use when meeting new people who recognized him. "And you are?" "Ron Weasley," the red-haired boy responded, seeming slightly awed despite his attempt to appear casual. "This is my mum, Mrs. Weasley. We're getting my school supplies too." "Mrs." Weasley looked up from her list and smiled warmly at Harry, though her expression carried the particular kindness adults often showed when meeting someone they knew had experienced tragedy early in life. "How lovely to meet you, dear. I knew your parents slightly during the war. They were wonderful people." "Thank you," Harry said sincerely. "I'm honored to meet their friends. This is Hermione Granger, and my aunt, Mrs. Dursley." As the expanded group browsed together, Harry observed the dynamic between Ron and his mother with interest. It was clear that the Weasley family had deep roots in the magical community, and Ron possessed the kind of instinctive understanding of magical customs that came from growing up in an entirely magical household. However, Ron's academic preparation seemed considerably less thorough than either Harry's or Hermione's. When Hermione mentioned reading about the theoretical foundations of transfiguration, Ron looked blank. When Harry referenced historical accounts of magical conflicts, Ron's knowledge appeared limited to basic facts rather than detailed analysis. "Are you looking forward to any particular subject at Hogwarts?" Harry asked, hoping to find common ground with his potential future classmate. Ron shrugged. Flying, I suppose. My brothers all say that's the best part of school. Well, that and Quidditch once you're old enough to try out for the house teams. Harry nodded enthusiastically. I've read about Quidditch extensively, though I haven't had much opportunity to practice flying. It sounds like an incredibly complex sport that combines physical skill with strategic thinking. You've never flown? Ron asked with surprise. But you're Harry Potter. Surely your aunt and uncle would have gotten you a toy broomstick when you were little. Actually, Petunia interjected gently, we felt it was more important for Harry to develop a strong theoretical foundation in magical principles before focusing on practical applications like flying. We wanted him to understand the magical theory behind flight before attempting it himself. Ron looked confused by this approach, clearly having grown up in a household where magical practice and theory developed simultaneously rather than sequentially. That's interesting, he said politely, though his tone suggested he couldn't quite understand the reasoning behind such thorough preparation. Mrs. Weasley, however, looked impressed. That's very sensible, Mrs. Dursley. Too many young people rush into practical magic without understanding the underlying principles. I'm sure Harry will be exceptionally well prepared for his studies. As they completed their shopping at Flourish and Blotts, the three potential future classmates had established a comfortable rapport despite their different backgrounds and approaches to magical education. Hermione clearly appreciated Harry's theoretical knowledge and ethical framework, while Ron brought a practical understanding of magical culture that complemented their more academic perspectives. Their next stop was Madame Malkin's Robes for All Occasions, where Harry needed to be fitted for his Hogwarts uniforms. The shop was busy with other families conducting similar business, and Harry found himself sharing a fitting platform with a pale, sharp-featured boy who was examining his reflection in the mirror with obvious satisfaction. "First year at Hogwarts, too?" the boy asked, his voice carrying the confident tone of someone accustomed to social prominence. "Yes," Harry replied politely. "I'm looking forward to it tremendously." "I should think so," the boy said, with slight condescension, "though I suppose it must be quite overwhelming for someone who didn't grow up in a proper magical household. I'm Draco Malfoy, by the way. My father is on the Hogwarts Board of Governors." Harry recognized the name from his studies of recent magical history and political developments. The Malfoy family had been suspected Death Eater sympathizers during Voldemort's first rise to power, though they had avoided prosecution after claiming to have been acting under the Imperius Curse. "It's nice to meet you, Draco," Harry said carefully, his tone remaining friendly despite his knowledge of the family's controversial reputation. "Actually, I've been fortunate to receive excellent preparation for magical education from my aunt. She's spent years helping me understand magical theory and history." Draco's expression shifted slightly, suggesting that Harry's response had not matched his expectations. "Your aunt is magical, then? I had heard that you were living with Muggles." "My aunt isn't magical herself, but she's incredibly knowledgeable about magical theory and history," Harry explained. "She's ensured that I understand my magical heritage and the responsibilities that come with it." "How interesting," Draco replied, though his tone suggested he found the concept of a Muggle teaching magical theory rather dubious. "Well, I suppose any preparation is better than none. You'll find that students from old magical families have certain advantages when it comes to understanding the finer points of wizarding culture." Harry recognized the implicit challenge in Draco's statement and the underlying prejudice against Muggle-raised witches and wizards. His response was carefully measured to demonstrate knowledge without appearing confrontational. "I've found that magical culture has many fascinating layers," he said thoughtfully. "The influence of ancient magical traditions, the development of contemporary magical law, the philosophical frameworks that guide ethical magical practice. My aunt has helped me understand how all these elements work together to create the rich community we're both privileged to join." Draco blinked in surprise, clearly not having expected such a sophisticated response from someone he had assumed would be ignorant of magical cultural complexities. His expression shifted from condescension to curiosity. You seem quite well informed for someone raised outside magical society, he admitted grudgingly. Perhaps your aunt is more capable than I initially assumed. She's remarkable, Harry agreed warmly. I'm very grateful for everything she's taught me about understanding and respecting magical traditions while maintaining my own ethical principles. As their fitting session concluded, Draco extended his hand in a gesture that seemed to acknowledge Harry as a social equal rather than someone to be patronized. Perhaps we'll be sorted into the same house, he said. I'm sure we'll have interesting discussions about magical theory and tradition. I'd welcome that opportunity, Harry replied, shaking Draco's hand with genuine friendliness. Thoughtful conversation about magical principles is always valuable, regardless of what house we're sorted into. The encounter with Draco had been illuminating in several ways. Harry's thorough preparation had allowed him to engage confidently with someone from an established magical family, demonstrating that knowledge and ethical grounding could transcend differences in background or family history. More importantly, his response to Draco's implicit prejudices had opened the possibility of meaningful dialogue rather than immediately creating an adversarial relationship. Harry's approach suggested that understanding and respect could bridge even significant philosophical differences. Their final stop was Ollivander's, the ancient wand shop where Harry would finally receive the magical focus that would allow him to translate his theoretical knowledge into practical spellwork. The narrow, dusty shop felt heavy with centuries of magical history, and Mr. Ollivander emerged from the depths of his store with the slightly otherworldly manner of someone who had spent decades matching witches and wizards with their perfect magical instruments. "Ah, Mr. Potter," Ollivander said, his pale eyes gleaming with interest and recognition. "I wondered when I would be seeing you. It seems only yesterday that your mother and father were in here, buying their first wands." Harry felt a familiar mix of pride and sadness at the mention of his parents. "Could you tell me about their wands, sir? I've studied their magical research extensively, but I've never learned the details of the instruments they use to focus their magic." Ollivander's expression grew thoughtful and slightly distant as he recalled the details. "Your mother's wand was 10¼ inches, willow, with a dragon heartstring core. Excellent for charm work, particularly protective enchantments. Your father's wand was 11 inches, mahogany, with a dragon heartstring core as well. Powerful wand, excellent for transfiguration work." As Ollivander began the process of finding Harry's wand, testing various combinations of wood and core materials, Harry reflected on the significance of this moment. For years he had studied magical theory and developed his understanding of spellwork without the ability to cast actual spells. Now, finally, he would have the tool that would allow him to translate knowledge into action. The wand selection process proved more complex than usual, with Ollivander trying dozens of different combinations before finding the perfect match. When Harry finally held the wand that chose him, 11 inches of holly with a phoenix feather core, the connection was immediate and profound. "Curious," Ollivander murmured as magical sparks danced around Harry's fingers. "The phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand gave just one other feather. It is curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar." Harry understood the implication immediately, having studied the connection between magical instruments and their wielders extensively. His wand shared a core with Voldemort's wand, creating a mystical connection that would influence any future magical confrontations between them. "What does that mean for my magical development?" Harry asked, demonstrating the analytical approach Petunia had taught him to apply to all magical phenomena. "It means your magical education will be even more remarkable than we already expected," Ollivander replied, with something approaching reverence. "Twin wands create unique resonances in their wielder's magic. Your abilities may develop in ways that surprise even those of us who consider ourselves experts in magical theory." As they left Diagon Alley that afternoon, Harry carried with him not just his Hogwarts supplies, but a deeper understanding of his place in the magical community. The day's encounters had confirmed that his thorough preparation would allow him to engage confidently with peers from all backgrounds, while his ethical grounding would guide him toward meaningful relationships based on mutual respect rather than social positioning. More importantly, the positive responses of shopkeepers, fellow students, and even someone as tradition-minded as Draco Malfoy had demonstrated that knowledge and character could transcend differences in background or family history. When September first arrived, Harry Potter would board the Hogwarts Express not as an outsider trying to find his place in an unfamiliar world, but as a well-prepared young scholar ready to contribute meaningfully to the magical community while continuing his own remarkable development. The wizarding world was beginning to understand that the boy who lived was far more than a famous name or a symbol of victory over dark forces. He was a young person of exceptional ability and character, prepared to claim his heritage while using his gifts in service of others. Tonight, as Harry practiced with his new wand in the transformed garden of Privet Drive, casting his first formal spells under Petunia's proud supervision, the future seemed bright with infinite possibilities. Platform 9 3/4 bustled with the familiar chaos of September 1st, witches and wizards shepherding their children through the magical barrier, while trunks rattled and owls hooted from their cages. Harry Potter stood beside Petunia at the entrance to the platform, his school trunk packed with advanced texts, and his holly wand secured in his robes, watching the organized pandemonium with the calm confidence of someone who understood exactly what to expect. This moment had been anticipated for years, planned for and prepared for, with the same meticulous attention Petunia had applied to every aspect of Harry's magical education. Yet now that it had finally arrived, both aunt and nephew felt the weight of transition settling around them like a tangible presence. "You have everything you need, darling?" Petunia asked, running through her mental checklist one final time, despite knowing that Harry's preparation had been exhaustive. "Everything and more," Harry replied with a smile that mixed excitement with gratitude. "The books, the supplies, the theoretical foundation, and most importantly, the values you've taught me about how to use magic responsibly. I'm as ready as anyone could possibly be." Petunia felt tears prick at her eyes as she looked at the young man Harry had become. 11 years old, but carrying himself with the quiet dignity of someone much older, intellectually prepared for challenges that would daunt most adult wizards, yet still possessing the curiosity and kindness that made him genuinely likable rather than intimidating. "Remember what we discussed about making friends," she said softly. "Your knowledge is a gift to be shared, not a weapon to establish superiority. The students who will become your closest friends are those who value learning for its own sake, not those who are impressed by how much you already know." "I understand," Harry assured her. "I want to help other students succeed, not prove that I'm better than them. The friendships worth having are based on mutual respect and shared interests, not academic competition." As they approached the scarlet steam engine that would carry Harry to Hogwarts, they encountered familiar faces from their Diagon Alley shopping expedition. Hermione Granger was saying goodbye to her parents, with the barely contained excitement of someone finally beginning the adventure she had dreamed about for months. "Harry, Mrs. Dursley," Hermione called out, waving enthusiastically as she spotted them in the crowd. "Isn't this exciting? I can hardly believe we're actually going to Hogwarts at last." "It certainly is remarkable," Harry agreed, genuinely pleased to see his new friend again. "Have you had a chance to review any of the advanced reading materials we discussed?" "Oh yes," Hermione replied eagerly. "I found copies of several texts on magical theory at a bookshop in London, and I've been working through the sections on spell construction and magical energy manipulation. The theoretical framework is fascinating, though I'm looking forward to finally being able to practice the actual spell work." Harry's expression grew animated as they discussed the finer points of magical theory, their conversation quickly moving into concepts that would have challenged most third-year students. Petunia listened with pride and amusement, recognizing that Harry had indeed found someone who shared his passion for deep understanding of magical principles. Their academic discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Ron Weasley, who was struggling to maneuver his trunk while keeping his pet rat, Scabbers, from escaping its cage. His family surrounded him in a whirlwind of last-minute instructions and affectionate chaos. "Remember to write, dear," Mrs. Weasley was saying, attempting to smooth Ron's unruly hair, while simultaneously checking that he had packed all his required supplies. "And do try to stay out of trouble this year." "Mum, I haven't even gotten to school yet," Ron protested with good-natured exasperation. "How can I already be in trouble?" "With your track record, it's entirely possible," one of his older brothers called out with a grin. "Just remember, the secret passages behind the mirror on the 4th floor lead directly to detention if Professor McGonagall catches you using them." Harry and Hermione exchanged amused glances at this glimpse into the Weasley family dynamic, which clearly combined genuine affection with a healthy appreciation for mischief and adventure. Ron's background was so different from their own methodical approaches to magical education, yet there was something appealing about his comfortable familiarity with the magical world. As the three potential friends boarded the Hogwarts Express together, Harry felt a surge of optimism about the social connections he hoped to build during his school years. Hermione's intellectual curiosity complemented his own academic interests perfectly, while Ron's practical knowledge of magical culture would help him navigate social situations he might not have encountered in his more sheltered educational environment. They found an empty compartment near the middle of the train and settled in for the long journey to Scotland. Harry carefully stowed his trunk in the overhead rack, noting with amusement that it was considerably heavier than his companion's luggage due to the advanced texts Professor Dumbledore had recommended for his modified curriculum. "So," Hermione said, as the train began to move, pulling away from King's Cross Station with a great hiss of steam and the musical whistle that announced another year's journey to Hogwarts, "what are you both most looking forward to learning this year?" "Everything," Ron replied with the honest enthusiasm of someone who had grown up hearing stories about Hogwarts from his older brothers. "But especially defense against the dark arts. My brothers say Professor Quirrell is supposed to be brilliant, though he's a bit nervous around students." Harry's interest was immediately piqued. Defense against the dark arts was one of the subjects where his advanced preparation would be most relevant, given his extensive study of his parents' research on protective magic and defensive spells. "I've read Professor Quirrell's published work on countercurse theory," Harry said thoughtfully. "His approach to defensive magic emphasizes understanding the theoretical foundations of dark magic in order to develop more effective protections against it. That aligns very well with the research my parents conducted on magical defense." "Your parents were researchers?" Hermione asked with obvious fascination. "I read about their work with the Order of the Phoenix, but I didn't realize they had contributed to academic magical theory as well." "They were quite accomplished," Harry confirmed, his voice carrying pride, mixed with the familiar sadness that came with discussing parents he would never truly know. "My aunt preserved their research materials, and I've spent years studying their innovations in protective magic and defensive enchantments. They believed that the most effective way to combat dark magic was to understand it thoroughly and then develop superior defensive techniques." "That's exactly the approach Professor Quirrell advocates in his theoretical work," Hermione observed excitedly. "The idea that knowledge is the best defense against dangerous magic, rather than simply trying to match power with power." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the tea trolley, pushed by a kindly witch who was offering sweets and snacks to the students. Ron immediately began digging through his pockets for money to buy chocolate frogs and pumpkin pasties, while Hermione examined the magical sweets with the scientific curiosity she applied to all new phenomena. Harry purchased enough treats to share with his compartment mates, remembering Petunia's instructions about the social importance of generosity in building friendships. As they sampled the various magical confections, their conversation turned to speculation about house sorting and what they hoped to find at Hogwarts. "I've read that the sorting hat takes into account not just your personality traits, but also your values and aspirations," Hermione said, carefully examining a chocolate frog card featuring Adelbert Waffling, whose work on magical ethics Harry recognized from his advanced reading. "I hope I'm sorted into a house where academic achievement is valued and supported. Gryffindor would suit you well," Ron suggested, offering her some of his Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. "My whole family has been in Gryffindor for generations, and they definitely respect students who work hard and stand up for what they believe in." "All the houses have admirable qualities," Harry observed diplomatically, though he privately suspected his own sorting was likely predetermined by his parents' legacy and his natural inclination toward protective magic. Gryffindor values courage and moral conviction, Ravenclaw prizes intelligence and creativity, Hufflepuff champions loyalty and fair play, and Slytherin respects ambition and resourcefulness. The key is using whatever house values you embody in service of good rather than selfish purposes. "You sound like you've given this considerable thought," Hermione said approvingly. "Most students seem to focus primarily on which house has the best reputation, rather than thinking about how house values align with their personal ethics. My aunt emphasized the importance of understanding the philosophical foundations behind magical institutions," Harry explained. "She wanted me to appreciate that Hogwarts houses aren't just social groups, but communities built around specific approaches to magical learning and character development." As the train continued its journey through the British countryside, other students began visiting their compartment, drawn by curiosity about Harry's fame and staying to participate in increasingly sophisticated discussions about magical theory and Hogwarts traditions. Neville Longbottom, a round-faced boy who seemed perpetually nervous about losing his pet toad, joined them briefly and was amazed to discover that Harry knew about his parents' tragic fate and respected their contributions to the fight against dark magic. Luna Lovegood, a dreamy blonde girl with an unconventional perspective on magical phenomena, engaged Harry in a fascinating discussion about the theoretical possibilities of magical creatures that most wizards considered mythical. Most significantly, Draco Malfoy appeared in their compartment doorway with two large, intimidating boys flanking him like bodyguards. Harry recognized this as a social test of some kind, an attempt to establish dominance or hierarchy among the first-year students. "Potter," Draco said, with the slightly challenging tone he had used during their encounter at Madame Malkin's. "I heard you were on the train. These are Crabbe and Goyle," he added, gesturing to his companions without bothering to introduce them more formally. "Hello, Draco," Harry replied with calm friendliness, rising to shake hands as proper magical etiquette demanded. "It's good to see you again. These are my friends, Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley." The tension in the compartment was palpable as Draco's gaze moved between Ron and Hermione, clearly evaluating them according to whatever social criteria he had been taught to apply. His expression suggested that Ron's obviously hand-me-down robes and Hermione's muggle background did not meet his standards for appropriate companions for someone of Harry's fame and potential influence. "Weasley," Draco said with barely concealed disdain. "Red hair, freckles, and more children than they can afford. You must be a Weasley. And I suppose this is Granger. I heard there was a muggle born in our year." Harry felt anger rise in his chest at the casual prejudice in Draco's tone. But he remembered Petunia's lessons about responding to social challenges with dignity rather than aggression. "Hermione is one of the most brilliant people I've ever met," Harry said firmly, but without hostility. "Her insights into magical theory have already helped me understand several complex concepts more clearly, and Ron's knowledge of magical culture and traditions has been invaluable in helping me appreciate the rich history of our community." Draco's expression shifted slightly, suggesting that Harry's response had not matched his expectations. He had clearly anticipated that Harry would either be intimidated by his implicit social threats or would abandon his new friends in favor of Draco's more prestigious associations. "Of course," Draco said after a moment, his tone becoming more diplomatic. "I'm sure they both have their qualities. I simply thought you might appreciate meeting students from more established magical families." My father always says that the connections you make at Hogwarts will influence your entire future career. I'm grateful for the opportunity to meet students from all backgrounds, Harry replied diplomatically. I found that the most interesting conversations come from people with different perspectives and experiences. Diversity of thought leads to better understanding of complex problems. Hermione shot Harry a grateful look, while Ron's expression showed both surprise and approval at having his friendship defended so eloquently. Even Crabbe and Goyle seemed uncertain about how to respond to Harry's measured but firm rejection of Draco's implicit social hierarchy. An interesting perspective, Draco acknowledged, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Perhaps we'll have opportunities to continue this discussion once we're sorted into our houses. I'd welcome that, Harry said sincerely. Thoughtful dialogue about important issues is always valuable, regardless of what houses we're sorted into. After Draco and his companions left, the atmosphere in the compartment relaxed considerably. Ron looked at Harry with something approaching awe, while Hermione's expression showed both gratitude and increased respect. That was brilliant, Ron said admiringly. I've never seen anyone handle Malfoy like that. He was obviously trying to get you to drop us for his more posh friends. But you turned it around completely. Harry shrugged modestly. My aunt taught me that the measure of a person isn't their family background or social status, but how they treat others and what they do with the opportunities they're given. Draco may come from an influential family, but that doesn't automatically make him a better friend than people who have earned my respect through their character and abilities. You defended us without making him look foolish or starting a conflict, Hermione observed thoughtfully. That was very diplomatically handled. You managed to make your values clear while leaving the door open for future positive interactions. As the train neared Hogwarts and students began changing into their school robes, Harry reflected on the social dynamics he had navigated during the journey. The interactions had confirmed his suspicions about the various personality types he would encounter at school, and his responses had established important precedents for how he intended to handle social challenges in the future. More importantly, his friendships with Hermione and Ron had been strengthened by the way he had handled Draco's implicit challenge. Both had seen that Harry valued their friendship enough to defend it publicly, and both had witnessed his ability to maintain his principles without creating unnecessary enemies. When the Hogwarts Express finally pulled into Hogsmeade Station and the students began disembarking into the cool Scottish evening, Harry felt a profound sense of anticipation mixed with confidence. The journey had not only brought him physically closer to Hogwarts, but had also solidified the social connections that would sustain him throughout his magical education. As Hagrid's booming voice called for first years to follow him toward the boats that would carry them across the lake, Harry walked beside his new friends with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had successfully navigated his first major social challenge at Hogwarts. The castle loomed before them across the dark water, its windows glowing with warm light and its ancient towers reaching toward the star-filled sky. Soon, Harry would walk through those doors, not as a lost, confused child, but as a well-prepared young scholar ready to claim his place in the magical community while maintaining the values and friendships that would guide him toward a future worthy of his parents' sacrifice. The Sorting Hat awaited, along with professors eager to work with the most thoroughly prepared student in Hogwarts history. But first, there would be the boat ride across the lake, the walk up to the castle, and the final moments of transition between the careful preparation of his childhood and the grand adventure of his magical education. Behind him, the Hogwarts Express sat quietly on the platform, having delivered another generation of young witches and wizards to their destiny. Ahead lay Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, ancient and magnificent, and ready to welcome Harry Potter home at last. The great hall of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry stretched before the first-year students in all its magnificent splendor, exactly as Harry had imagined from years of reading about the castle's architectural wonders. The enchanted ceiling displayed a perfect replica of the star-filled September sky. Floating candles cast warm light across the 4 house tables, and the assembled students and faculty created an atmosphere of anticipation that was almost tangible. Harry walked with the other first years toward the front of the hall, his confidence evident in his upright posture and steady gaze. Unlike many of his companions, who appeared overwhelmed by the grandeur and magical atmosphere, Harry took in the scene with the appreciative understanding of someone who had spent years studying the theoretical foundations behind such impressive magical displays. The Sorting Hat sat upon its 3-legged stool, ancient and patched, radiating the distinctive magical signature that Harry could sense even from a distance. His studies of magical artifacts had taught him to recognize objects imbued with centuries of accumulated enchantments, and the hat was clearly a masterwork of sustained magical consciousness. As Professor McGonagall called the first few names and students were sorted into their houses, Harry observed the process with fascination. Each sorting seemed to involve a brief but intense magical communion between the hat and the student, suggesting that the legendary artifact was indeed capable of reading thoughts, analyzing character, and making sophisticated judgments about personality and potential. When his own name was called, the great hall fell into complete silence. Every eye in the room turned toward Harry Potter, the boy who lived, as he walked calmly to the stool and allowed Professor McGonagall to place the ancient hat upon his head. The moment the hat settled over his ears, Harry felt the extraordinary sensation of another consciousness touching his mind with gentle but thorough curiosity. "Well, well, well," the Sorting Hat's voice echoed inside Harry's head, warm with amusement and growing amazement. "What have we here? In all my centuries at Hogwarts, I have never encountered a first-year student with such extensive magical knowledge and theoretical understanding." Harry remained calm despite the unusual nature of mental communication, responding as he would to any distinguished magical entity. "Thank you for the compliment, sir. I've been fortunate to receive excellent preparation from my aunt, who ensured that I understood both the academic and ethical foundations of magical practice." "Indeed you have," the hat replied, its mental voice growing increasingly impressed as it explored the depth and breadth of Harry's education. "Your theoretical knowledge rivals that of many 7th-year students, your understanding of magical ethics is sophisticated beyond your years, and your practical abilities demonstrate remarkable control and power." The hat paused in its exploration, and Harry sensed it examining not just his knowledge, but his character, his motivations, and his deepest values. "Most fascinating of all," the hat continued, "is how you have integrated advanced magical education with genuine humility and concern for others. You seek knowledge not to dominate or impress, but to protect and serve. You understand that great ability creates great responsibility." As the hat's examination continued, Harry became aware that their mental conversation was taking much longer than the typical sorting process. The great hall had grown restless, with whispers beginning to circulate among the students and faculty about the unusual delay. "You present me with a most intriguing challenge, young Potter," the hat mused. "You possess the courage and moral conviction that defines Gryffindor, the intelligence and creativity that characterizes Ravenclaw, the loyalty and fairness that exemplifies Hufflepuff, and the ambition and resourcefulness that marks Slytherin." Harry waited patiently for the hat's decision, understanding that this was a momentous choice that would influence not just his own Hogwarts experience, but potentially the future of the magical community. In most students, such a balance of qualities would make sorting difficult, the hat explained. But in your case, the path is clear. Your parents' legacy calls to you from Gryffindor, but more importantly, your own nature aligns with the house that values moral courage above all other virtues. However, the hat continued, "I must warn you that your exceptional preparation will set you apart from your peers in ways that could be challenging. You will find yourself capable of magical feats that other students cannot attempt, understanding concepts that confuse your classmates, and facing expectations that no 11-year-old should have to bear." "I understand the challenges," Harry responded mentally, But I also understand that isolation and difficulty are prices worth paying if they allow me to use my abilities in service of others. My aunt taught me that privilege creates obligation, and exceptional preparation creates exceptional responsibility. Spoken like a true Gryffindor, the Hat declared with obvious approval. You will find in that house the companions who will support you through the trials ahead, and the environment that will challenge you to become the leader you are destined to be. The Hat's voice rose to address the entire Great Hall, ending their lengthy mental conversation with a declaration that would be remembered for generations. Never in my 1,000-year history at Hogwarts have I sorted a student who embodies the finest qualities of all 4 houses so completely. This young man possesses Gryffindor's courage, Ravenclaw's wisdom, Hufflepuff's loyalty, and Slytherin's determination. He could lead any of our houses to greatness. The Great Hall held its collective breath as the Hat paused dramatically. But his heart calls him to follow in his parents' footsteps, to stand with those who value moral courage above personal advancement, to join the house that has produced the greatest defenders of justice in our school's history. Harry Potter belongs in Gryffindor. The last word rang out across the Great Hall like a trumpet call, and the Gryffindor table erupted in celebration. Students jumped to their feet, cheering and applauding as Harry walked toward them with a smile of genuine pleasure and relief. As he took his place at the Gryffindor table, Harry was immediately surrounded by older students eager to welcome him to their house. Percy Weasley, Ron's older brother and a prefect, shook his hand with obvious pride. The Weasley twins, Fred and George, grinned at him with the particular enthusiasm they reserved for people they suspected might be kindred spirits in mischief-making. "Welcome to Gryffindor, Harry," Percy said formally. The Hat's comments were quite extraordinary. I've never heard it speak at such length about any student's qualifications. "Most remarkable sorting I've ever witnessed," agreed Professor McGonagall, who had approached the Gryffindor table to congratulate Harry personally. "The Hat's analysis of your character and abilities was unprecedented in its detail and admiration." As the sorting ceremony continued, Harry watched his new friends join him at the Gryffindor table. Hermione was sorted quickly into Gryffindor, her relief at being placed with Harry evident in her delighted smile. Ron followed soon after, the Hat barely touching his head before announcing his placement in the family house. The sorting of other students provided Harry with insights into the personalities and backgrounds of his future classmates. Neville Longbottom was sorted into Gryffindor after a lengthy consideration that suggested hidden depths beneath his nervous exterior. Draco Malfoy went to Slytherin as expected, but he caught Harry's eye across the hall and nodded respectfully, suggesting that their earlier conversation on the train had established a foundation for civil relations despite their different house allegiances. When the sorting concluded and Professor Dumbledore rose to address the assembled school, Harry listened with particular attention to the headmaster's words about unity, learning, and the responsibilities that came with magical education. "Welcome to Hogwarts," Dumbledore said, his voice carrying easily across the Great Hall without the aid of magical amplification. "To our new students, I offer the promise that you will find here not just knowledge and skill, but the wisdom to use them well. To our returning students, I remind you that each year brings new opportunities to grow in understanding and character." The feast that followed was a revelation of magical culinary artistry that impressed even Harry, who had experienced many wonders during his years of preparation for Hogwarts. The food appeared on the golden plates through house elf magic that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of spatial manipulation and temporal coordination. As he ate and conversed with his new housemates, Harry found himself fielding questions about his unusual sorting experience and his educational background. He answered honestly but modestly, emphasizing the role of his aunt's dedication in his preparation while avoiding any suggestion that he considered himself superior to other students. "The Hat seemed to think your knowledge was quite exceptional," observed a 7th-year student named Oliver Wood, whom Harry recognized as the Gryffindor Quidditch captain. "Have you been studying magic long before your Hogwarts letter arrived?" "My aunt has been teaching me magical theory since I was very young," Harry explained. "She wanted me to understand my heritage and the principles behind magical practice. But I know that theoretical knowledge is very different from practical application, especially in a formal educational setting." "That's a wise distinction," Wood replied approvingly. "Some students arrive thinking they know everything, and end up struggling when they discover that actual spell work requires different skills than just reading about magic." As the evening progressed, Harry became increasingly aware of the attention his exceptional sorting had attracted from faculty members throughout the Great Hall. Professors kept glancing toward the Gryffindor table, clearly curious about the student who had prompted such unprecedented commentary from the sorting hat. Professor Snape, in particular, seemed to be studying Harry with an intensity that suggested complex emotions beneath his stern exterior. Harry recognized him from Petunia's descriptions of his parents' school years, and understood that the potions master's relationship with James and Lily Potter had been complicated by personal history that extended far beyond academic matters. When Professor Dumbledore announced that it was time for students to retire to their dormitories, Harry followed Percy and the other Gryffindor first years through the castle corridors toward Gryffindor Tower. The journey provided his first direct experience of Hogwarts' magical architecture, with moving staircases, talking portraits, and enchanted doors that responded to passwords and magical recognition. The Gryffindor common room was exactly as Harry had imagined from his readings about Hogwarts traditions. Warm and welcoming, with comfortable armchairs arranged around a crackling fireplace, walls lined with bookshelves and portraits of former Gryffindors, and an atmosphere that encouraged both study and relaxation. As the first-year boys were shown to their dormitory, Harry reflected on the extraordinary day he had experienced. The sorting ceremony had not only placed him in his parents' house, but had publicly acknowledged his exceptional preparation in a way that would influence his entire Hogwarts experience. More importantly, the hat's detailed analysis had confirmed that his advanced abilities came with correspondingly advanced responsibilities. The magical community would expect great things from him, not just because of his fame as the boy who lived, but because of his demonstrated potential for extraordinary magical achievement. His dormitory room was comfortable and well appointed, with his trunk already waiting at the foot of a four-poster bed hung with red velvet curtains. His roommates included Ron, Neville, Dean Thomas, and Seamus Finnegan, each bringing different backgrounds and personalities that would contribute to their shared experience over the coming years. As Harry unpacked his belongings and prepared for his first night at Hogwarts, he found himself looking forward to the challenges that lay ahead. The sorting had demonstrated that his preparation was recognized and valued. His friendships with Ron and Hermione had survived the house placement process, and the faculty seemed genuinely excited about working with a student of his capabilities. More significantly, the hat's public declaration that he embodied the best qualities of all four houses had established him as a unique figure at Hogwarts, someone who might be able to bridge traditional divisions and unite students from different backgrounds around shared values rather than house rivalries. Tomorrow would bring his first classes, his first opportunities to apply theoretical knowledge in practical magical settings, and his first experiences of learning alongside peers who shared his passion for magical education. The professors would discover what Harry could contribute to classroom discussions and collaborative learning, while his fellow students would see how he used his advanced abilities to support rather than overshadow their own development. As he lay in his comfortable bed, listening to the gentle sounds of his roommates settling in for the night, Harry felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this moment. Petunia's love and dedication had given him not just knowledge and ability, but the character to use them wisely. His parents' sacrifice had preserved his life and provided him with a legacy of courage and service that would guide his choices throughout his magical education. The Sorting Hat's unprecedented commentary had marked him as someone special, but Harry understood that truly exceptional achievement would come not from his magical power or theoretical knowledge, but from how he chose to use those gifts in service of others. The sorting ceremony had ended with him in Gryffindor House, but his real journey toward becoming the wizard he was destined to be was just beginning. Outside the dormitory windows, Hogwarts Castle settled into its nighttime rhythms, ancient stone walls containing centuries of magical learning and countless dreams of young people discovering their potential. Harry Potter was now part of that great tradition, ready to write his own chapter in the ongoing story of magical education and ethical development. The wizarding world had witnessed something unprecedented in the Great Hall that evening, the sorting of a student whose preparation and character exceeded all previous examples. But the true measure of Harry Potter's exceptional nature would be revealed not in the ceremony that welcomed him to Hogwarts, but in the choices he would make during the years of magical education that lay ahead. The first rays of Scottish sunlight filtered through the enchanted windows of Gryffindor Tower as Harry Potter woke to his first morning as a Hogwarts student. Around him, his dormitory mates were stirring with the mixture of excitement and nervousness that characterized the beginning of any great adventure. Ron Weasley was already sitting up in bed, his red hair even more disheveled than usual, while Neville Longbottom was carefully laying out his robes with the meticulous attention of someone determined to make no mistakes on his first day. Harry dressed quickly in his Hogwarts uniform, the familiar weight of his holly wand resting comfortably in his robes. After years of theoretical study, he would finally have the opportunity to apply his extensive magical knowledge in formal classroom settings, working alongside professors who were experts in their respective fields and learning from peers who brought diverse perspectives to magical education. The Great Hall buzzed with the energy of hundreds of students beginning a new school year. Harry joined Hermione and Ron at the Gryffindor table, noting with amusement that Hermione had already organized her class schedule, textbooks, and supplies with the precision of a military operation. "I've been awake since 5, analyzing our timetable," Hermione announced, as Harry took his seat beside her. "We have Transfiguration first with Professor McGonagall, then Charms with Professor Flitwick, followed by Potions with Professor Snape this afternoon. I've read all the assigned chapters twice, and I've prepared preliminary notes on the theoretical foundations we're likely to discuss." Harry smiled at his friend's enthusiasm, recognizing the same passionate dedication to preparation that Petunia had instilled in him. "That's excellent preparation, Hermione. Though I suspect we'll find that classroom magical instruction involves techniques that go beyond what we can learn from textbooks alone." Ron looked between his two academically minded friends with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. "You two are incredible," he said, shaking his head as he reached for another piece of toast. "Most first-year students are nervous about whether they'll be able to cast spells at all, and you're already analyzing advanced theoretical frameworks." "Everyone has different strengths," Harry replied diplomatically. "Your practical knowledge of magical culture and traditions will be just as valuable as our theoretical preparation. Magic isn't just about casting spells correctly. It's about understanding how magical communities function and how individual abilities contribute to the greater good." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their class schedules, delivered by a stern-looking Professor McGonagall, who paused at their section of the table to address Harry directly. "Mr. Potter," she said, with the formal courtesy she reserved for important academic matters, "Professor Dumbledore has asked me to remind you that your modified curriculum includes independent study periods that will require careful time management alongside your regular coursework." "I understand, Professor," Harry replied respectfully. "I'm prepared to dedicate whatever time is necessary to meet the academic expectations that have been established for my unique situation." McGonagall's expression softened slightly, revealing a hint of the pride she felt in having such an exceptionally prepared student in her house. "I have no doubt that you will rise to the challenge, Mr. Potter. However, remember that academic excellence should enhance, rather than replace, the social connections that make Hogwarts education truly valuable." As they made their way to their first Transfiguration class, Harry reflected on Professor McGonagall's reminder about balancing academic achievement with social development. His advanced preparation would undoubtedly set him apart from other students, but he was determined to use his knowledge in ways that supported collaborative learning rather than individual competition. The Transfiguration classroom was arranged with individual desks facing Professor McGonagall's demonstration area, where a magnificent tabby cat sat with the regal bearing of someone accustomed to commanding respect and attention. Harry recognized the cat immediately from his studies of animagus transformation, understanding that he was witnessing Professor McGonagall in her animal form. When the last student had taken their seat, the cat leaped gracefully onto the teacher's desk and transformed in a single fluid motion into Professor McGonagall, her emerald robes settling around her, as if they had never been anything other than her natural attire. The first-year students gasped in amazement at the demonstration, but Harry's reaction was one of analytical appreciation rather than simple wonder. He had studied the theoretical foundations of animagus transformation extensively, and he could recognize the extraordinary skill and control required to make the change appear so effortless. "Transfiguration," Professor McGonagall began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had mastered one of the most complex branches of magical study, "is some of the most dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing about in my class will leave and not come back. You have been warned." She gestured to the match that had appeared on each student's desk. "Today, we will begin with the fundamental principle of object-to-object transformation. You will attempt to change these matches into needles. The spell is simple in concept, but requires precise visualization, controlled intent, and exact wand movement." As Professor McGonagall demonstrated the proper technique, Harry found himself analyzing not just the visible aspects of the spell, but the underlying magical theory that made transformation possible. His years of studying his parents' research had given him insights into the mathematical relationships between different forms of matter and the energy required to restructure molecular bonds. When the students began attempting the transformation, Harry approached the task with the methodical precision Petunia had taught him to apply to all magical endeavors. He closed his eyes briefly, visualizing the match's wooden structure and the metallic composition of the needle he intended to create, then performed the wand movement with careful attention to the timing and angle that would optimize the magical energy transfer. His match transformed into a perfect silver needle on the first attempt. Professor McGonagall, who had been moving among the students to observe their progress, stopped beside Harry's desk with an expression of amazement that she quickly controlled. "Excellent work, Mr. Potter," she said quietly, though her voice carried across the classroom clearly enough for other students to hear. "Perfect transformation on the first attempt. Could you explain to the class what visualization technique you used to achieve such precision?" Harry stood respectfully, aware that this moment would establish important precedents for how his advanced abilities were perceived by both faculty and fellow students. "I focused on understanding the molecular structure of both the match and the needle," he explained, his tone educational rather than boastful. "Then I visualized the energy required to restructure the wood fibers into metal while maintaining the overall shape and proportions of the object." The classroom was silent as students absorbed this explanation, which went far beyond anything they had expected to hear from a first-year student. Professor McGonagall nodded approvingly. "That demonstrates an understanding of transfiguration theory that typically develops during advanced study," she observed. "Mr. Potter, would you be willing to assist classmates who are struggling with the basic visualization techniques?" Harry's response reflected the values that had guided his entire educational development. "I'd be honored to help in any way I can, Professor. Learning is most effective when students support each other's understanding rather than competing for individual recognition." As Harry moved among his classmates, offering gentle guidance and encouragement to those whose matches remained stubbornly unchanged, he demonstrated the approach to academic excellence that would characterize his entire Hogwarts experience. Rather than using his advanced abilities to establish superiority, he applied them in service of collaborative learning that benefited everyone. Hermione, whose match had achieved a partial transformation that left it silver but still wooden in texture, listened carefully to Harry's explanation of energy visualization techniques, and managed a complete transformation on her second attempt. "Thank you," she said, with genuine gratitude. "I understood the theory, but I wasn't visualizing the energy transfer clearly enough. Your explanation made the connection between theory and practice much clearer." Even Ron, whose match had produced only a few silver sparkles, benefited from Harry's patient instruction in wand movement precision, and found himself achieving visible progress by the end of the class period. Professor McGonagall observed these interactions with obvious approval, recognizing that Harry's exceptional abilities were being used to elevate the entire class rather than to demonstrate individual superiority. Their charms class with Professor Flitwick proved equally revealing of Harry's unique educational background. When the diminutive professor introduced the levitation charm as their first practical spell, Harry's execution was flawless from the beginning, but his response to success continued to emphasize collaboration over competition. "Wingardium Leviosa," Harry said clearly, his wand movement precise and controlled as his feather rose smoothly into the air and maintained perfect stability several feet above his desk. Professor Flitwick clapped his hands with delight. "Wonderful, Mr. Potter. Absolutely wonderful. The control and stability you've achieved suggests extensive study of levitation theory. Could you share your understanding of the charm's mechanisms with your classmates?" Harry's explanation covered the relationship between magical intent and gravitational manipulation, the importance of maintaining steady magical output to prevent oscillation, and the visualization techniques required to achieve precise directional control. His presentation was clear, educational, and delivered with the humble enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved helping others understand complex concepts. When Hermione achieved success with the charm after applying Harry's suggestions about magical focus, and when Ron managed to lift his feather briefly using the wand grip adjustment Harry had recommended, the classroom dynamic shifted from individual struggle to collaborative learning. Professor Flitwick was so impressed with the cooperative atmosphere that he spent the remainder of the class period encouraging students to share techniques and insights with each other, creating an environment where everyone's unique strengths contributed to collective understanding. However, it was the afternoon potions class with Professor Snape that would provide Harry's most significant academic challenge of the day. The dungeon classroom was cold and unwelcoming, filled with the preservative scents of magical ingredients and lined with jars containing specimens that seemed designed to unsettle rather than educate. Professor Snape entered the classroom with the dramatic flair of someone who considered intimidation an essential teaching tool, his black robes billowing behind him as he took his position behind the teacher's desk and surveyed the first-year students with obvious disdain. "You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion-making," Snape began, his voice soft but carrying easily through the silent classroom. "As there is little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of the softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, ensnaring the senses." Harry listened with genuine interest to Professor Snape's introduction, recognizing the passionate expertise beneath the intimidating presentation. His studies of his mother's potions research had given him deep appreciation for the precision and artistry required for advanced potion making, and he understood that Professor Snape's reputation as a master of the subject was well deserved. However, it quickly became apparent that Professor Snape's teaching methods included singling out individual students for aggressive questioning, and Harry realized that his fame and resemblance to his father would make him a likely target. "Potter," Snape said suddenly, his dark eyes fixing on Harry with unmistakable hostility, "our new celebrity. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry recognized the question immediately from his extensive reading of advanced potions texts. The combination would produce the Draught of Living Death, a powerful sleeping potion whose brewing required exceptional skill and precise timing. The powdered root of asphodel added to an infusion of wormwood creates the draught of living death, Professor, Harry replied calmly, his tone respectful despite the obvious hostility behind the question. The potion is classified as highly dangerous due to its potency and the irreversible coma that results from incorrect dosage. Snape's expression showed surprise that was quickly masked by increased antagonism. Tut, tut. Fame clearly isn't everything. Let's try again. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? A bezoar is found in the stomach of a goat and serves as an antidote to most poisons, Harry answered without hesitation. It's particularly effective against plant-based toxins and alchemical compounds, though it has limited effectiveness against certain magical poisons that require specific counteragents. Snape's eyes narrowed as he realized that Harry's knowledge extended far beyond what any first-year student should possess. And what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They are the same plant, Professor, which also goes by the name aconite, Harry replied. The plant is highly toxic in its natural state, but serves as a crucial ingredient in the wolfsbane potion when properly prepared. The potion allows werewolves to maintain their human consciousness during transformation, representing one of the most significant advances in magical medical treatment for lycanthropes. The classroom was completely silent as students realized they were witnessing an extraordinary display of advanced knowledge from someone who should have been struggling with basic concepts. Snape stared at Harry for a long moment, his expression revealing complex emotions that included surprise, anger, and perhaps a grudging respect for the depth of knowledge Harry had demonstrated. "Well," he said, finally, his voice carrying a note of frustrated acknowledgement, "it appears that someone has actually bothered to prepare you properly for magical education. 5 points to Gryffindor for demonstrating that exceptional preparation can overcome the limitations of celebrity status." The backhanded compliment contained both recognition of Harry's knowledge and continued hostility based on personal history with James Potter. Harry understood that his relationship with Professor Snape would be complicated by factors beyond academic performance, but he was determined to maintain respectful behavior regardless of the provocation he might encounter. As the class proceeded with the brewing of a simple boil-cure potion, Harry found himself helping Neville, whose nervousness had led to several potentially dangerous mistakes in ingredient preparation. Rather than allowing Neville to fail publicly, Harry quietly guided him through the correct techniques while ensuring that Professor Snape's attention remained focused elsewhere. This kind of supportive intervention became Harry's characteristic approach throughout his first day of classes. In every subject, he used his advanced knowledge to elevate the learning experience for everyone rather than to establish his individual superiority over less prepared students. By the end of the day, word had spread throughout Hogwarts about the first-year Gryffindor, whose academic abilities rivaled those of much older students, but who used those abilities to help his classmates succeed, rather than to demonstrate his own exceptional nature. That evening, as Harry sat in the Gryffindor common room, reviewing his notes from the day's classes and preparing for tomorrow's lessons, he reflected on how his educational philosophy had been received by both faculty and students. Professor McGonagall had clearly been impressed not just by his magical abilities, but by his willingness to share knowledge generously. Professor Flitwick had responded to his collaborative approach by restructuring the entire class period to emphasize peer learning. Even Professor Snape, despite his obvious personal antipathy, had been forced to acknowledge the quality of Harry's preparation. More importantly, his fellow students had begun to see him not as an intimidating competitor, but as a valuable resource who was genuinely interested in helping everyone succeed. Hermione had already approached him about forming a study group for students who wanted to explore magical theory beyond the basic curriculum, while Ron had expressed amazement at how patient and encouraging Harry had been during their transfiguration practice. As Harry prepared for his second day at Hogwarts, he felt confident that he had successfully established the precedent he wanted to maintain throughout his magical education. His exceptional abilities would continue to set him apart from other students, but they would serve as tools for building community and supporting collaborative learning, rather than barriers that isolated him from meaningful friendships. The professors had discovered that they were working with a student whose preparation exceeded their expectations, but they had also learned that his character and values made him someone who would contribute positively to the Hogwarts learning environment. Tomorrow would bring new classes, new challenges, and new opportunities to demonstrate that exceptional magical ability, when guided by ethical principles and genuine concern for others, could transform not just individual education, but the entire academic community. Outside the common room windows, Hogwarts Castle settled into its nighttime rhythms, ancient stones containing the dreams and aspirations of another generation of young witches and wizards discovering their potential. Harry Potter had begun his formal magical education exactly as Petunia had hoped he would, with knowledge, wisdom, humility, and an unwavering commitment to using his extraordinary gifts in service of others.